My name is Rebecca Thornton. I'm 38 years old now, but this story begins when I was 36. A founder, a CEO, a sister, a wife, and apparently the only person in my family who didn't get the memo that I was everyone's favorite ATM. I built something real, something that mattered, and the two people I loved most in this world decided the best use of my trust was to destroy it, together, in my own bathtub on a Tuesday afternoon in November. What happened next wasn't a breakdown, it was a reckoning. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and please, stay with me until the end. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, 9 a.m. The morning started the way every morning started. Espresso, no sugar, the financial news playing low on the kitchen speaker while I stood at the island in my robe going through my emails before I even fully woke up. Some people ease into their day. I never learned how to do that. My name is Rebecca Thornton. At 36, I was the founder and CEO of Thornton Green Design, a sustainable architecture firm based in Portland, Oregon. 47 employees, 3 major projects in active development, a reputation in the Pacific Northwest design community that I had spent 13 years building from absolutely nothing. I want you to understand what nothing means in this context, because it matters later. When I graduated from the University of Oregon in 2010 with a degree in architecture and a minor in environmental design, I had $847 in my checking account, a used Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard, and a borderline obsessive belief that buildings could be designed to actually help the planet instead of slowly destroying it. No family connections in the industry, no trust fund, no mentor who handed me a golden ticket. What I had was my grandmother, Dorothy Thornton, who pulled me aside at my graduation dinner at a Denny's in Eugene, because that's what we could afford, and pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was a handwritten note explaining that she had established a family land trust in my name. A small parcel of property in the West Hills, not worth millions, but worth enough to serve as collateral, worth enough to give me a foundation when I had none. You're the one who's going to build something, she told me, squeezing my hand with her papery grip. I've known it since you were 7 and you redesigned the living room furniture arrangement because, and I quote, "the energy flow is all wrong, Grammy." I laughed. She laughed. 3 months later, she was gone. I named the company after her, and I made sure that trust, the Thornton Family Trust, established 2015, remained exactly as she intended, in my name, under my stewardship, protected. That detail will matter. Hold on to it. By the time November 2023 came around, Thornton Green Design was operating out of a converted warehouse in the Pearl District with floor-to-ceiling windows and a living moss wall in the lobby that visitors always stopped to photograph. We had just closed the pre-sale phase of our third major eco-development, the Cascade Living Complex, a mixed-use sustainable housing project that had taken 2 years to design and had attracted attention from architecture publications in New York and Berlin. I was proud, genuinely, quietly proud. And I was also, if I'm being completely honest with you, exhausted in the specific way that comes from carrying everything alone for so long that you forget what it felt like before the wait. That morning, I had a 9:30 call with our Chicago partner about structural timelines, then a noon lunch with a potential investor, then a 3 p.m. flight out of PDX to Chicago for a client presentation the following day. My husband, Daniel Hartley, 38 years old and technically our chief operating officer. A title I gave him because it seemed like the right thing to do when we got married in March 2021, was supposedly in back-to-back internal meetings all day. "Don't wait up," he'd said that morning, kissing my forehead with the practiced ease of someone performing a habit rather than expressing an emotion. "Big day, I'll probably be here late." "Me too," I said. "Flight's at 3. "Safe travels, Beck." He picked up his coffee and walked out of the kitchen. I watched him go, and then I looked down at his phone, which he'd left on the counter, something he almost never did. And I saw the screen light up with a text notification at 8:47 a.m. The sender name was just a letter, S. The preview read, "Has he left yet?" I looked at that message for exactly 4 seconds. Then I turned the phone face down, finished my espresso, and went upstairs to finish packing my carry-on. I want to be clear about something. I was not surprised. I was not falling apart. I had not just discovered something I didn't know. I had just received confirmation of something I had been quietly, methodically preparing for since January. Here's what people don't understand about being betrayed by someone you love. The worst part isn't the moment you find out. The worst part is the 6 months before that. The slow, horrible process of watching the evidence accumulate and choosing day after day to gather it carefully instead of exploding because you know, that if you explode too soon, you lose everything. I had known something was wrong since January 2023. It started small, the way these things always do. A dinner receipt for 2 at our door, a steakhouse on Northwest 23rd on a Wednesday night when Daniel said he was working late with the Cascade project team. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except that I happened to know the entire Cascade team had gone to happy hour at a dive bar in the Alberta Arts District that same night. I'd seen the group photo in our company's Slack channel the next morning. Then in March, I noticed a $340 charge at La Belle Boutique, a lingerie store on Southwest Broadway. I asked him about it. He said it was a birthday gift for his mother, Patricia, and he had the audacity to look me straight in the eye when he said it. I called Patricia that weekend under the pretense of wishing her happy birthday. She thanked me for the card Daniel sent. Just a card, she said. Nothing else. That was the moment I stopped being a wife and started being a forensic accountant. By April, I had identified 11 separate financial discrepancies. Cash withdrawals ranging from $200 to $800 labeled as client entertainment in our household budget app. A hotel charge in Cannon Beach, a 2-hour drive from Portland. On a weekend, he told me he was at a golf retreat with Harold Whitfield, our board chairman. I never confronted him, not once, because I knew Daniel. I knew exactly what would happen if I confronted him without airtight proof. He would cry. He would apologize. He would turn it around somehow, make me feel like the suspicious, paranoid wife who couldn't trust her husband, and I would second-guess myself for another 6 months while he got smarter about covering his tracks. I needed the smoking gun. I needed something irrefutable. In September 2023, I called Eleanor Voss. Eleanor had been our family's estate attorney for 30 years. She'd drafted the Thornton Family Trust. She'd known me since I was 12. She was 62 years old, 5'4", and possessed the quiet, absolute authority of someone who had seen every variety of human disaster and remained completely unimpressed by all of it. I sat in her office for 2 hours. I showed her everything I had gathered. She listened. She took notes. She asked 4 questions. Then she said, "Rebecca, you are better prepared than 90% of the clients who walk through that door after the fact. Let's make sure we're ready before anything else happens." We spent the next 6 weeks making sure. But on the morning of November 14th, I still didn't know the full truth. I suspected Daniel. The evidence pointed to someone he was spending time and money on. The text from S was consistent with someone named Savannah, my sister Savannah. 31 years old, 5 years younger than me, dark hair, effortless smile, the kind of effortless that costs a significant amount of money to maintain. Money that she borrowed from me, that I paid in various forms, that I handed over because she was my little sister and I had always been the one who fixed things. I had hired her as marketing director at Thornton Green Design in June 2021. Not because she had a marketing degree, she didn't, but because she asked and because I thought having her close would be good for our relationship, and because I genuinely believed she wanted to work. I want to be fair to the version of Savannah I believed in then. She tried, in the beginning. She showed up on time. She had ideas. She was charming with clients in a way that I, frankly, am not. But slowly, inevitably, the charm became currency and the work became optional. And I let it happen because she was my sister and I loved her and I told myself it was fine. I look back at that version of myself and I want to reach through time and shake her. It was not fine. The 9:30 call went well. The noon lunch ran over. By 1:15 p.m., I was in an Uber to the airport, checking my boarding pass on my phone when the notification came through from the airline. Flight PDX to ORD delayed indefinitely. Mechanical issue. Passengers advised to rebook. I stared at the notification. I called the airline. The representative told me the next available flight was early the following morning. I could have gone to the office. I could have gone to a coffee shop and worked until the evening. I could have called Daniel and told him I was coming home. I did none of those things. I opened Uber, entered my home address, and sat back in the seat. I didn't text anyone. I just watched the city slide past the window, thought about nothing in particular, and felt that cold, steady thing in my chest that had been living there since January settle into something that felt almost like clarity. Today, I thought, today is the day. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, 2:09 p.m. The house on Westover Heights had always been the thing I was most privately proud of. Not the company, not the awards or the press coverage or the satisfying thickness of a well-executed contract. The house. I bought the land in 2017, 3 years before I met Daniel, using the Thornton Family Trust as collateral. I designed it myself. 4 bedrooms, open-plan kitchen and living area, a wraparound deck on the back overlooking a terrace garden that I planted myself on weekends with a stubbornness that my friends found baffling and I found meditative. The house was mine in the truest sense of the word. Every wall, every window, every carefully chosen fixture was a decision I made. I want you to remember that. The Uber pulled up to the curb at 2:09 p.m. I thanked the driver, waited until he pulled away, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking at the house. Savannah's SUV, a white Lexus that I had been co-signing the lease on for 2 years because her credit was shot, was parked in the circular driveway. I looked at it for a moment, then I opened the gate with my personal code and walked up the front path without making a sound. The front door opened with my thumbprint. I stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet in that particular way that immediately tells you it isn't actually empty. It's the quiet of people who think they're alone. Heavy, self-satisfied, oblivious. Savannah's red heels were on the entry rug, not placed, kicked off, one sideways. Daniel's suit jacket was draped over the back of the living room sofa, loosened tie still looped around the collar. I stood in the foyer and took a breath. From upstairs, faint, unmistakable, the sound of the jacuzzi jets, and underneath that, music, and underneath that, laughter. My sister's laugh. I had known that sound since she was 3 years old. I reached into my bag, found my phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. Then I went upstairs. Every step on that staircase was deliberate. My flats made no sound on the hardwood. The laughter got louder as I reached the landing. The master bedroom door was open. I stopped in the doorway. Savannah's dress, the green wrap dress she'd bought with the Visa gift card I gave her for her birthday, was on the floor next to the bed. Daniel's belt and slacks were folded over the armchair in the corner. His watch, the Patek Philippe I gave him for our first anniversary, was on the nightstand. The bathroom door was cracked open, steam curling out like a slow exhale. I walked toward it without thinking, or maybe I was thinking very clearly. Even now, I'm not entirely sure which one it was. I looked through the gap, and there they were. Daniel leaning back in the jacuzzi with a glass of my Willamette Valley Pinot Noir in one hand. Savannah across from him, wet hair slicked back, laughing at something he'd just said. His other hand tracing a slow line up her forearm with the easy, proprietary intimacy of someone who has done this many times before. They looked comfortable. That was the detail that hit hardest, not the shock of it. I had braced for that. It was the comfort, the ease, the complete casual absence of guilt. They looked like two people who had long since stopped asking themselves whether this was wrong. I stood there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of something I can only describe as the sensation of a door closing very quietly in a room that has been slowly filling with smoke. Not a bang, a click. Final. Done. Then I stepped back from the bathroom door. I pulled it closed with the softest possible pull until I heard the latch catch, a barely audible click that was swallowed completely by the noise of the jets. I opened my purse. My key ring has always been a source of gentle mockery among people who know me. I carry more keys than any reasonable person needs. Daniel used to joke about it. Beck, you're like the world's most uptight janitor. And I used to laugh because I knew what each key was for and the knowledge felt like security. One of those keys was older than the others. Brass, slightly tarnished, unremarkable. It was the skeleton key that operated the original deadbolt mechanism on the master bathroom door, a period detail the previous owners had installed during a 1940s-era renovation and that I had kept, against the advice of our contractor, because I thought it was interesting. Daniel had called it my control freak trophy. I inserted the key into the lock. Click, turned it once. Click, turned it again. The deadbolt engaged with a solidity that you could feel in your hand, a physical confirmation of something that had already been decided. I straightened up, adjusted my blazer, then I walked downstairs, found the open bottle of Pinot Noir they'd been helping themselves to, a 2019 Domaine Druhin, as it happened, one I'd been saving, and poured myself a glass. I sat at the kitchen island, I pulled out my phone, and I called Nathan. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023. 2:24 p.m. Nathan Cole was 34 years old and had been our lead architect at Thornton Green Design for 3 years. He was also, as of that moment, still technically married to my sister. I say technically because Nathan Cole had known for longer than I had that his marriage was not what it appeared to be. He was not a dramatic person. He did not process things loudly. He processed the way a structural engineer processes a load-bearing problem, quietly, methodically, and with the specific patience of someone who understands that rushing the math leads to collapsed ceilings. He answered on the second ring. Rebecca. Nathan. I kept my voice low and even, the same register I used when I was closing a difficult negotiation. I need you to come to the house right now. Don't call Savannah. Don't text her. Don't tell anyone where you're going. A pause. Not the pause of confusion, the pause of someone already knowing. How bad is it? Bad enough. Another pause. I could hear him setting something down, the quiet rustle of someone already reaching for his keys. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Nathan. Yeah. Bring the green envelope. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, long enough for both of us to acknowledge what the green envelope meant. 14 months earlier, in September 2022, Nathan and I had stayed late at the office working through a zoning dispute. Around 9 o'clock, when everyone else had gone home, we'd cracked open a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet in the conference room, the good stuff I kept for client celebrations. And somehow, in the way that conversations go when the defenses come down after a long day, we ended up talking honestly. He told me he'd noticed things, small things at first. Savannah coming home with a perfume that wasn't hers, being evasive about her Tuesdays, the way she'd answer her phone in another room. He'd confronted her twice, and both times she'd cried and told him he was paranoid, and he'd backed down because he loved her and because he wasn't sure. I told him I'd noticed things too. We didn't name names that night. We weren't ready. But at the end of the conversation, Nathan had said something that stuck with me. I'm not going to be caught off guard. If the worst happens, I want to be ready. 3 weeks later, he'd quietly had an attorney friend draft divorce papers. He'd put them in a green envelope in the bottom drawer of his desk at home. He told me about it in passing, almost as an afterthought. Just in case, he'd said, with the grimly pragmatic calm of a man who has accepted a possibility without surrendering to it. I had done the same thing. In September 2023, I'd called Eleanor Voss. We had both been waiting in our separate corners for the day when waiting was no longer the right strategy. That day was today. I spent the 17 minutes before Nathan arrived doing 3 things. First, I texted Eleanor Voss. It's time. Can you be available in 30 minutes? She replied in under a minute. Already on my way to you, Nathan called. Of course he had. Nathan Cole was never not 3 steps ahead. Second, I went through the house methodically and took photographs of everything. Savannah's shoes in the foyer, her dress on the bedroom floor, the 2 wine glasses on the edge of the jacuzzi that I could see through the cracked door I'd relocked. The whole time, the voice memo was still running in my phone, quietly capturing every muffled thud and muted conversation from behind the bathroom door. They had figured out the door was locked by this point. I could hear the handle rattling, first tentative, then increasingly urgent. Daniel's voice, muffled through 3 inches of solid oak. Rebecca? Beck, come on. Open the door. This isn't funny. And then Savannah, sharper, the entitled edge of someone who had never in her life been told no by anyone who mattered. Seriously? You're gonna pull this drama right now? My stuff is out there. Open the door, Beck. God. I sat at the kitchen island and drank my wine and said nothing. The third thing I did was walk into the living room and look at the family photograph on the bookshelf, the one from Thanksgiving 2022, all of us together, my parents and Savannah and Nathan and Daniel and me standing in front of my parents' fireplace. We're all smiling. Savannah is leaning into Daniel slightly, and at the time I thought nothing of it because why would I? I looked at that photo for a moment. Then I put it face down on the shelf, went back to the kitchen, and poured myself a second glass. Nathan arrived at 2:51 p.m. I heard the doorbell and walked to the front door, and when I opened it, I found him standing on the front step in his work clothes, dark jeans, a charcoal button-down, a jacket he'd clearly just grabbed off the back of his office chair. He looked like a man who had driven here on autopilot, running on adrenaline and the strange, bitter calm that comes with the end of something. Eleanor Voss was right behind him. She had clearly driven herself. She was adjusting her reading glasses and carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized from our September meetings. Nathan held up the green envelope. His hand was completely steady. "I signed them before I left the house," he said quietly. I stepped aside. They walked in. We didn't need a long briefing. I gave them 4 minutes of summary. What I'd found, the recording on my phone, the photographs, the locked door. Eleanor asked 2 quick questions, took notes, and immediately opened her laptop. Nathan sat in the living room armchair and looked at the staircase. We could all hear it now. The pounding on the bathroom door had evolved from frantic to rhythmic, and Daniel's voice had shifted from panicked to the performatively calm, condescending register he deployed whenever he thought he could logic his way out of something. "Baby, listen to me. I know what this looks like. It's not what you think. Just open the door and let me explain, okay? Just give me 5 minutes. Savannah was dizzy. She gets those spells, you know that? And she needed to sit down, and I was helping her, and things got dizzy," I said out loud to no one in particular. Eleanor didn't look up from her laptop. "They always go with dizzy." "He's blaming me." Savannah's voice cut through Daniel's, sharp and irritated. She was apparently done with the conciliatory approach. "Stop trying to manage her, Daniel. She's not going to fall for it." "Savannah, No, you shut up. You said she'd be in Chicago until tomorrow." "You said..." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone has just said the wrong thing very loudly. Nathan looked at the stairs. A muscle in his jaw worked once. Then he reached into the green envelope, pulled out the papers, and set them on the coffee table with the quiet finality of someone closing a chapter. "Shall we go up?" Eleanor said. "Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, 3:08 p.m. There is a specific kind of silence that exists in a house right before everything changes. Not peaceful silence, not the comfortable quiet of an empty afternoon. It's the silence of held breath, the house itself seeming to contract slightly, as if bracing. That's what I felt as the 3 of us walked up the floating staircase. Eleanor led, portfolio tucked under one arm, reading glasses pushed up on her head, moving with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this. Not this exactly, but something like this, the formal dismantling of a lie, dozens of times before. Nathan was behind her. I was last. The pounding on the bathroom door had gone quiet in the last few minutes. That worried me more than the noise had. Silence from Daniel meant he was thinking. Daniel thinking was Daniel strategizing, and Daniel strategizing with his back against a wall was Daniel at his most dangerous. Not because he was particularly clever, but because he was willing to say absolutely anything. We reached the landing. Nathan stopped outside the master bedroom door and looked at me. Not asking permission. Checking in. There's a difference. And with Nathan, you always feel it. I nodded. He pushed the door open. The bedroom was exactly as I left it, which was somehow worse than if it had been disturbed. The green dress still on the floor. The Patek Philippe on the nightstand catching the late afternoon light. The 2 empty champagne flutes I hadn't noticed before, sitting on the dresser. They'd apparently started with champagne before moving on to my Pinot Noir, which was a detail so casually entitled that almost made me laugh. Almost. I walked to the bathroom door, reached for the brass key still in the lock, and paused for exactly 1 second. Behind the door, silence. They'd heard our footsteps. I turned the key. Click, click. I pushed the door open. The steam had mostly dissipated, leaving the room damp and slightly hazy, smelling of the eucalyptus bath salts I kept on the shelf. A scent I would, from that day forward, permanently associate with betrayal rather than relaxation. Daniel and Savannah were standing in the center of the bathroom floor. They'd wrapped themselves in my white Turkish cotton towels. The good ones, the ones I'd ordered from a small textile company in Istanbul after reading about them in an architecture magazine. They were dripping onto the heated tile floor, hair wet, faces doing that specific thing faces do when a person is desperately cycling through possible responses and finding none of them adequate. Daniel's eyes went to me first, then to Nathan, then back to me. The calculation was visible, a rapid, almost audible recalibration of what the situation was and what it required of him. Savannah looked at Nathan, and that was the moment I understood something I hadn't fully understood before. She had not expected him. She had factored in my reaction, had probably even prepared for it, had some version of a speech ready, some combination of tears and justification that she'd rehearsed on the drive over here or in the bath or God knows when. But Nathan, standing in the doorway of her sister's bathroom, looking at her with the expression of a man who has already finished grieving, that she had not prepared for. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Nate," she said, and her voice came out smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Honey, don't," he said. Just that. One word, quiet and absolute, the way a structural wall is absolute, not dramatic, not emotional, just load-bearing. Daniel, meanwhile, had shifted tactics with the speed of someone who had spent years surviving uncomfortable situations on charm alone. "Okay," he said, holding up one hand in a gesture of practiced reasonableness, his towel secured at his waist with the other. "Okay, let's all just take a breath here. I know what this looks like. I completely understand why you're upset, Beck, and I want you to know that your feelings are 100% valid. Daniel, but I need you to hear me out before you make any decisions, because there is context here that you don't have, and if you'll just give me 5... Daniel." He stopped. I looked at him calmly. "You used the words 'your feelings are valid' to your wife, who just found you in her bathtub with her sister. I want you to sit with that for a second." From behind me, Eleanor made a sound that was technically a cough. "This is Eleanor Voss," I continued, stepping aside slightly. "She's been my family's attorney for 30 years. She has some paperwork she'd like to share with you." Daniel stared at Eleanor. His expression went through 3 distinct phases in about 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, then the specific pale, nauseated quality of someone who has just realized the situation is not, in fact, recoverable. "Paperwork," he repeated. Eleanor said pleasantly, opening her portfolio. "Tuesday, November 14th, 2023. 3:14 p.m., Nathan had not moved from the doorway. He wasn't blocking it. He was simply occupying it, which in Nathan's case amounted to the same thing. He was 6'2" and built like someone who had spent his 20s doing manual labor, which he had, working construction summers to pay for his architecture degree. He didn't project menace. He projected the much more unsettling quality of total self-containment. Savannah had wrapped the towel tighter around herself and was watching him with the expression of someone who has made a terrible bet and is watching the race results come in. "Nathan, please say something," she said. "You're scaring me." "I'm not trying to scare you, Savannah." His voice was even. "I'm trying to be civil about something that doesn't deserve civility. It was a mistake. Stop." He said it the same way he'd said, "Don't." Quiet, final, with no room in it for argument. I've heard the mistake speech twice. I don't need to hear it a third time. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced the green envelope. He crossed the bathroom in 4 steps and set it on the counter next to the sink. Not handed it to her, placed it the way you place something down when you're done with it. "What is this?" she whispered. "Open it." She did. Her wet fingers left marks on the paper as she pulled out the document. The heading was in bold, clean type across the top of the first page. "Petition for dissolution of marriage in the Circuit Court of the State of Oregon for Multnomah County." Savannah made a sound. Not quite a cry. Something more involuntary than that, like air being pushed out of something that's been punctured. You already filed this?" "Not yet. I wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing before it went to the court." "Nate, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can..." "Savannah." He looked at her steadily. "I installed a GPS tracker on the Subaru 4 months ago. After the night you came home smelling like someone else's cologne and told me you'd been at Nicole's bachelorette thing, which I confirmed with Nicole, by the way." The color drained from Savannah's face. "I have the location data from March through last week," Nathan continued, his voice holding that terrible, quiet steadiness. "The hotel in Cannon Beach, the Airbnb in Hood River, the 3 times you parked in this driveway when Rebecca was out of town for work." He paused. 3 times, Savannah. In her house, while she was gone. Silence. Daniel, for the first time since we'd opened the door, had nothing to say. "I didn't come here to fight," Nathan said, looking at her one last time with an expression that I can only describe as the look of someone saying goodbye to a version of their life. "I came here because Rebecca needed a witness and because I needed to see it myself. I've seen it." He turned and walked out of the bathroom without looking back. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. The front door opened and closed. He was gone. The silence he left behind was heavier than anything that had been said. Savannah stood in the middle of the bathroom holding the dissolution papers, her wet hair dripping onto the tile, looking at the door Nathan had just walked through. Something was moving across her face that I hadn't seen there in a long time, something that looked almost like genuine remorse. Or maybe it was just shock. With Savannah, even after 31 years, I couldn't always tell the difference. Daniel had sat down on the edge of the jacuzzi. His hands were on his knees. The performative calm had collapsed entirely, and what was underneath it was smaller and less impressive than the performance had suggested. Eleanor set a document on the counter next to the dissolution papers. "Mr. Hartley," she said in the tone of someone reading a verdict, "this is a copy of the Thornton Family Trust Declaration, originally established in 2015 and amended in 2019. You'll want to look at the property schedule on page 4. Daniel looked up. "What does the trust have to do with—" "The property you are currently occupying," Eleanor said, "was purchased in 2017 by the Thornton Family Trust, 2 years before you met Rebecca and 4 years before your marriage. The trust is the sole legal owner of this residence. Rebecca is the sole beneficiary. Your name does not appear on the deed, the trust schedule, or any mortgage documentation." She paused just long enough for that to land. Under Oregon property law, a guest whose invitation has been revoked has no legal claim to remain on the premises. As of approximately 2:20 p.m. today, Rebecca verbally revoked that invitation. As of right now, your continued presence in this house constitutes trespass. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, 3:31 p.m. I want to tell you something about Daniel Hartley that I think is important for understanding what happened next. Daniel was not a stupid man. He was, in many ways, a talented one. He was charming in the specific way that reads as warmth without actually being warmth. He was good at reading rooms. He was good at knowing what people wanted to hear and saying it convincingly. These are not insignificant skills. In a different life, deployed honestly, they might have made him genuinely successful. The problem was that Daniel had spent so long using these skills to avoid consequences that he had completely lost the ability to assess when the consequences were no longer avoidable. He had talked his way out of so many things that he had come to believe, on some fundamental level, that he could talk his way out of everything. He was about to discover the specific misery of being wrong about that. He stood up from the edge of the jacuzzi, squared his shoulders, and pointed at me with the trembling finger of a man who has decided aggression is his best remaining option. "You set this up," he said, his voice rising. "This whole thing, coming home early, locking the door, having your lawyer here. You planned this. That's entrapment, Beck. You can't just ambush people in their own home." "It's not your home, Daniel. Eleanor just explained. I have mail here." He was fully shouting now, voice bouncing off the tile. "I have lived in this house for 2 years. I pay bills here. I have a key. I have residency. You cannot just—" "Sir." The voice came from the hallway. We all turned. 2 uniformed officers from the Portland Police Bureau were standing in the bedroom doorway. Eleanor had texted them from the car on her way over, a detail she had not mentioned to me in advance and that I remain grateful for to this day. Officer Reyes, the one who had spoken, early 40s, compact and unhurried, with the expression of someone who had responded to approximately 10,000 domestic situations and found all of them, on some level, the same. Looked at Daniel with the mild, patient attention of someone prepared to wait as long as necessary. "Sir, we've been briefed on the situation. Do you have any documentation establishing legal ownership or tenancy in this property?" Daniel turned to face him fully, apparently deciding that the officers were a better audience than Eleanor. "I am the COO of Thornton Green Design," he said, drawing himself up to his full height in a towel with the towering dignity of a man who does not recognize how absurd he looks. "I have lived in this house for 2 years. My name is on the utilities. My belongings are here. I have every legal right to—" "Sir," Officer Reyes said, his tone unchanged, "do you have a lease agreement, a deed, any document establishing a legal tenancy?" "I'm married to the owner. The property is held in trust and the owner has filed the documentation." Officer Reyes glanced at Eleanor, who handed him a single crisp page. He scanned it, nodded. "The trust documentation is in order. The beneficiary is requesting that you vacate the premises." "This is insane," Daniel said, turning back to me. His voice had gone ragged at the edges. "You're really doing this over one thing, over one mistake. You're going to blow up our entire—" "I am not blowing anything up, Daniel," I said. My voice was very calm. I had been calm for so long by that point that it had stopped being an effort and become simply the temperature of the room. I'm just not pretending anymore. There's a difference. He stared at me. "You have 10 minutes to collect the clothes you arrived in today. I said. Anything purchased during our marriage stays until the division process is complete. Eleanor has a full inventory. My Rolex is on that nightstand. Was a gift from me, making it a marital asset subject to division. It stays. My laptop was purchased on the company account and contains proprietary company data. It stays. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not anger, not charm, not the practiced warmth that had fooled me for years. Just something raw and unguarded, and underneath it, something that might have been the very first honest thing I'd seen from him in a long time. I don't even know who you are right now, he said. I picked up his Rolex from the nightstand, turned it over once in my hand, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the promotion it had celebrated, the weight of everything I'd believed when I bought it, and set it back down. Yes, you do, Daniel, I said quietly. You just never bothered to look. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, 3:52 p.m. Here is the thing about the Westover Heights neighborhood that I had always appreciated and now, for the first time, found useful in an entirely different way. It is the kind of neighborhood where people are always technically doing something else, trimming hedges, walking dogs, checking mailboxes, while actually paying very close attention to everything happening around them. The 2 patrol cars parked in my circular driveway had done their job efficiently. By the time Daniel and Savannah appeared in the front doorway, Daniel in the slightly wrinkled shirt and slacks he'd arrived in, tie missing, jacket retrieved from the living room sofa. Savannah barefoot because her red heels had been logged as marital assets and photographed by Eleanor. There was an audience. Mrs. Patterson from next door was watering a plant on her porch with the focused attention of someone who had not taken her eyes off the plant in 20 minutes. The retired couple from down the street were on their evening walk, walking very slowly. A woman I didn't recognize had stopped on the sidewalk with a stroller, apparently transfixed by her phone. Daniel saw all of it. He straightened his shirt, attempted to project through sheer force of will the posture of a man stepping out of it for a voluntary evening stroll rather than being escorted off the premises by 2 police officers. It didn't work. It couldn't work. There is no posture in the world that makes a shoeless woman clutching her own arms against the November chill look anything other than what it was. Savannah didn't try. She walked with her head down, dark hair falling forward, and I watched her and felt the complicated weight of 31 years compress itself into a single aching point in my chest. Not anger, not triumph. Something older and sadder than either of those things. I was standing on the front porch. Daniel looked up at me as Officer Reyes directed him toward the driveway. For a moment, just a moment, the performance fell away completely and it was just him and me looking at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with the 30 feet of front path between us. He started to say something. I don't know what it would have been. Maybe an apology, maybe another excuse, maybe something true. He didn't finish it. He just looked at me for one more second, then looked away and let the officers walk him down the drive. His car, a charcoal Audi A7, leased in my name, payments made from our joint account, was parked at the curb. He reached for his keys. Those stay too, Eleanor said from behind my shoulder. Daniel turned. How am I supposed to? I'd suggest calling someone, Eleanor said pleasantly, or there's a bus stop on Westover Boulevard. He looked at the car. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at me one more time. Then he put the keys down on the hood of the car, carefully, with a restraint that I suspected cost him significantly, and walked away down the driveway. Savannah followed him, and without looking back. I watched them until they reached the gate. Then I turned and went back inside. Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, 4:47 p.m. Eleanor left at 4:30 with a list of next steps, a full copy of the recording I'd made, and the particular brisk efficiency of someone who had just completed the first phase of a project and was already thinking about the second. I locked the front door. I poured the last of the Pinot Noir. I went to the living room and sat on the couch in the quiet of my own house, which felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like my house. Not a shared space, not a performance space, not a place where I was always slightly on guard, just mine. I had been sitting there for approximately 11 minutes when the phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen, but I looked anyway. Mom. I let it ring 3 times, took a sip of wine, set the glass down carefully on the coaster. Then I answered, Rebecca Elizabeth. My mother's voice hit the opening syllables of my name like a hammer on a nail, the way it always did when she was furious and wanted me to know it immediately. What in God's name have you done? Margaret at Thornton was 61 years old, the kind of beautiful that age had made more severe rather than softening, and the kind of mother who had spent 36 years loving both her daughters while consistently, reliably, in any situation that required a choice, choosing the same one. Not me. I'm assuming Savannah called you, I said. She is standing on the side of Westover Boulevard in bare feet, Rebecca. Bare feet. In November. Do you have any idea how, Mom, humiliating that is? The neighbors saw. People from the club live in that neighborhood. Do you understand what you've just... Mom. She stopped. Savannah slept with my husband, I said. My voice was flat and clear, the way you speak when you want every word to land without ambiguity. In my house, in my bathroom, while I was supposed to be on a plane. A pause. People make mistakes, Rebecca. I closed my eyes for 1 second. People make mistakes, she continued, her voice taking on the particular cadence of someone settling into a well-worn argument. She is young, she is impulsive, she has always been, you know how Savannah is. She doesn't think things through, that's why she needs people around her who are steady, who are the bigger person. I have been the bigger person my entire life, Mom. And I understand you're upset, I do, but you cannot throw your sister onto the street like she's nobody. She's your blood. She made a terrible mistake and she deserves grace. And whatever Daniel did, I repeated, you don't handle it like this. You handle it privately. You handle it like adults. You don't call the police. You don't make a scene in front of the whole neighborhood. You don't... I'm going to stop you there, I said. She stopped. She wasn't used to being stopped. I did not call the police to make a scene. I called Eleanor Voss to protect my legal rights, and the police were there to ensure the law was followed. That's what happened. Savannah is not on the street. She is on a public sidewalk with a phone and a wallet, both of which she has because I didn't take those. Rebecca, I paid Savannah's rent for 8 months in 2020. I co-signed her car lease. I gave her a job she wasn't qualified for and paid her $94,000 a year for 2.5 years. I paid for 2 semesters of the design program she dropped out of. I did all of that because she is my sister and I love her. My voice stayed even. I was proud of that. And she used the access that love gave her to spend the last several months in my bed with my husband. Silence. So when you ask me if I understand what I've done, yes, Mom. I understand exactly what I've done. The question is whether you understand what she did. My mother was quiet for a long moment. I waited. You've always been so cold, she finally said, and her voice had gone from furious to something smaller and, in some ways, more honest. Even as a little girl, so controlled, so... You never just let yourself feel things, Rebecca. You calculate everything. It's not... Goodbye, Mom. Don't you dare hang up on... I ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. The screen showed the call duration, 4 minutes, 12 seconds. 4 minutes and 12 seconds to cover 36 years. I went to my contacts, found Mom, tapped the information icon, scrolled to the bottom, blocked this caller. I pressed it. The confirmation screen asked if I was sure. I tapped yes. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences of that afternoon. Not the heavy silence of something about to happen, not the sharp silence of a door closing. This was the silence of something set down. I had carried the weight of being the difficult one, the cold one, the one who needed to be the bigger person, since I was old enough to understand that Savannah was the one our parents worried about and I was the one they trusted to be fine. I had been fine. Relentlessly, exhaustingly, silently fine. I was done being fine on other people's terms. I picked up my wine glass, walked to the back door, and stepped out onto the deck. The Portland evening was cold and clear, the city lights beginning to come on in the distance, the garden below me dark and quiet. My garden, my deck, my house. I stood there for a long time. I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even, honestly, entirely okay. There was a grief underneath everything. For the marriage I'd tried to believe in, for the sister I'd spent my whole life protecting, for the version of my family where none of this had happened. But there was also, underneath the grief, something solid and clean and mine. The war for my home is over, I thought. Tomorrow, the war for everything else begins. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 7:15 a.m. I slept 9 hours. I want to note that because it surprised me. I had expected to lie awake running calculations, rehearsing conversations, cataloging everything that could go wrong. That's what I normally do when something large is in motion. I run the scenarios until my brain finally exhausts itself somewhere around 3 a.m. and gives up. Instead, I made chamomile tea at 10 o'clock, took a shower, and was asleep by 10:30. Deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that only comes when your body has finally been given permission to stop bracing. I woke up at 6:45 a.m. to gray Portland, November light coming through the bedroom window. The bedroom I had slept in alone, in the center of the bed, spread out with the particular luxury of someone who has reclaimed territory. And for approximately 4 seconds, I felt nothing but the clean blankness of a fresh morning. Then my phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then 3 times in rapid succession. I picked it up. The notifications were from our internal company communication platform, Slack messages, several of them, from employees I wouldn't normally hear from before 8 o'clock. The preview of the first one from Tyler Brooks, our IT director, read, "Crap. Rebecca, did you see the..." I opened my email. There it was, sent at 7:02 a.m. from Daniel's company email address to all 47 Thornton Green Design employees with the subject line, "Urgent Leadership Update. Please read immediately." I read it once, quickly. Then I read it again, slowly, the way you read something when you need to make sure you are correctly understanding how audacious it is. Dear Thornton Green Design Team, it is with a heavy heart that I share some difficult news regarding our founder and CEO, Rebecca Thornton. Over the past several months, many of you have noticed increasing signs of emotional instability in Rebecca's behavior. Erratic decision-making, paranoia, and a troubling pattern of interpersonal volatility that several team members have privately expressed concern about. Yesterday, these issues came to a head in a serious personal incident that I am not at liberty to detail out of respect for Rebecca's privacy. What I can tell you is that Rebecca is currently in a fragile state and has been strongly advised by those close to her to take an indefinite leave of absence to seek the professional support she needs. Effective immediately, I will be assuming full operational control of Thornton Green Design as Chief Operating Officer. All decisions regarding projects, personnel, and client relationships should be directed to me until further notice. I know this is difficult news. Rebecca built something extraordinary here, and we all care about her deeply. The best thing we can do for her right now is ensure the company she loves remains stable and strong in her absence. With gratitude and resolve, Daniel Hartley, Chief Operating Officer, Thornton Green Design, put the phone face down on the bed. I counted to 5. I picked the phone back up and called Tyler Brooks. He answered before the first ring finished. "Oh, thank God. Rebecca, Tyler." My voice was calm. I had made a decision sometime in the last 12 hours that I was going to remain calm for the entire duration of whatever came next, and I intended to honor that decision. "Do you remember the protocol we discussed in September?" A pause. Then, "The lockout reversal and the access audit?" "Yes. Everything's been ready since October. I just needed your go-ahead." "You have it, but don't touch his access yet. I want him to spend the morning believing he's in control." "Okay." I could hear Tyler processing this. He was 29 years old and had been with the company since its 3rd year of operation. When I'd hired him straight out of Portland State because his senior thesis had been on cybersecurity architecture for small design firms, and I'd thought, this kid actually thought about something nobody else is thinking about. He had a gift for anticipating problems before they materialized, and he had the rare quality of loyalty that wasn't contingent on whether things were going well. "Rebecca, are you okay? Like, actually?" "I'm good, Tyler. I promise." And I meant it. "I need you to do one more thing for me this morning. Can you pull the access logs for the last 30 days? Everything Daniel touched, every file he opened, every external email. Already running it?" "Of course you are." For the first time that morning, I almost smiled. "I'll be in by 9:30. Don't tell anyone I'm coming." I hung up, got out of bed, made espresso, and while the coffee was brewing, I called Eleanor Voss. Eleanor answered on the first ring, which told me she had already seen the email. I had added her to the company's all-staff distribution list in September quietly, as part of the preparation process. It had seemed paranoid at the time. It seemed prescient now. "I've drafted the response filing," she said, skipping hello entirely. "The email constitutes defamation. He's made false statements about your mental health to your entire organization without any medical basis. It also potentially triggers the termination clause in his contract." "Which clause?" conduct bringing public disrepute or reputational damage to the company or its officers. He sent this from his company email account. That's a company communication. It's in writing. I poured my espresso. What about the board? Harold Whitfield called me at 7:20. He's seen the email and let's say he's uncomfortable. He wants a meeting. Tell him 10 o'clock, conference room. He already called Daniel first, Eleanor said. Daniel is apparently telling him that you had a, quote, complete psychological break and assaulted him and Savannah and that the police had to intervene on his behalf. I took a sip of coffee. The police report is going to be interesting reading for Harold then. I already sent it to him. I set the cup down. Eleanor, yes? Have I told you lately that you're worth every penny? You have not, but I appreciate the sentiment. Wear something authoritative today. First impressions at a power reclamation are important. She hung up. I went upstairs to get dressed. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 8:30 a.m. While I was getting dressed in my home on Westover Heights, my sister was conducting a different kind of operation on the 4th floor of our Pearl District office. I know this because Tyler's access logs captured it, and because 3 separate employees told me about it afterward, unprompted, with the particular discomfort of people who had been made complicit in something and wanted to make sure I knew they weren't enthusiastic about it. Savannah arrived at 8:22 a.m. wearing large sunglasses and a cashmere turtleneck that I recognized as one of several items from a shopping trip we'd taken together the previous spring. I had bought it for her because she'd admired it and the price hadn't seemed worth a conversation. She had her hair down and her expression arranged into the precise configuration of dignified suffering. Not crying, not angry, just sorrowfully composed in the way of someone who has been through something difficult but is being very brave about it. She went to the kitchen first, where 4 members of the junior design team were eating breakfast and scrolling through their phones. Most of them had already read Daniel's email and were in the collective low-grade anxiety state that spreads through an office when the leadership situation suddenly becomes unclear. Savannah sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she'd poured herself and said, in a voice carefully calibrated to be just quiet enough to seem private while being just loud enough to be heard by everyone in the room, I just want you all to know that whatever you've heard this morning, Daniel is doing his best to handle a really impossible situation. Rebecca has been struggling for a while. I think the pressure just finally got to her. What happened yesterday was scary for all of us. She paused to take a sip of coffee. She locked us in a bathroom, she added with the careful grief of someone reporting an upsetting weather event rather than the consequence of being caught committing adultery. We were just talking and she just snapped. I've been worried about her for months, honestly. The junior designers exchanged glances. A couple of them nodded with the earnest sympathy of people who hadn't yet learned to look for what a story leaves out. Savannah made 3 more stops on her tour of the office. The reception desk, where she told a slightly different version of the same story to the 2 administrative assistants who formed the central node of the company's informal information network. The project management bullpen, where she focused on the company's stability angle. Daniel is really stepping up. He genuinely cares about this place. Knowing that the PMs cared most about whether their projects would keep running, and briefly the entrance to the architectural studio on the far side of the floor where she stopped, looked in, and then kept walking. She kept walking because Nathan Cole was in there. Nathan was at his drafting table at 8:30 a.m. with his head down, working with the focused quiet of someone who has decided that the best response to chaos is to do his job exceptionally well. He did not look up when Savannah appeared in the doorway. He did not look up when she said his name, once, quietly, in the tone of someone hoping for a different outcome than the one they received yesterday. He just kept working. After a moment, Savannah walked away. The 2 junior architects who had witnessed this exchange did not go back to their work immediately. They looked at each other, and then, I was told later, one of them said, "Something doesn't add up." That's the thing about working for a company long enough. You develop a feel for who the actual load-bearing walls are, the people who, if you remove them, the whole structure would shift. Nathan Cole was one of those walls, and Nathan Cole was clearly not on board with the version of events being sold this morning. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023. 10 a.m. The Thornton Green Design Conference Room occupied the northeast corner of the 4th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city on 2 sides and a long reclaimed wood table that I had specified myself when we moved into the space 3 years ago. On a clear day, you could see Mount Hood from the east window. On a November morning in Portland, you could see the precise shade of gray that the sky turns when it has committed to being unpleasant until April. Daniel was already there when the board members filed in at 10 o'clock. He had positioned himself at the head of the table, my chair technically, though I'd never made a point of it being mine, and he'd dressed well. A navy suit I didn't recognize, which meant he'd had it at his mother's or somewhere else I didn't know about. His hair was neat, he'd shaved. He had the look of a man who had been awake since 5 a.m. preparing for this, which I suspected was true. The board of Thornton Green Design consisted of 7 members. Harold Whitfield, 67, our chairman, a third-generation Portland real estate developer who had been an early investor and whose instincts were good even when his assumptions were sometimes dated. George Sinclair, 61, who had played golf with Daniel every other Sunday for 2 years and who I suspected was going to be trouble. And 5 others whose primary interest was the return on their investment and who would follow whatever direction seemed most likely to protect it. Daniel's pitch, as I was told later by Harold in a conversation that I think he had partly to unburden himself, was polished and effective. He spoke about stability, he spoke about the company's employees and their families. He spoke, with apparent reluctance and genuine seeming emotion, about his concern for me, the Rebecca he loved and the Rebecca who had, he was sorry to say, become someone he didn't recognize in recent months. Someone consumed by paranoia and volatility, someone who had culminated in a frightening episode yesterday that had left him genuinely scared for her safety and for the company's future. He didn't mention the affair, he didn't mention the bathroom. He presented the story as a tragedy of mental health, with himself as the reluctant hero stepping up in a crisis. George Sinclair asked about the process for appointing an interim CEO. Harold asked about legal liability if Rebecca contested the transition. 2 other board members asked about the Cascade project timeline and whether it would be affected. Daniel answered all of it, smoothly, confidently, with the performance quality of a man who has been preparing his lines all night. He thought he had them. He thought the door was closed, the room secured, the narrative locked. He did not know that I was in the elevator. The conference room doors were glass, a detail I had specified because I believe in transparency, which has always been one of my less strategically useful qualities, and which today happened to work in my favor. Everyone in the room could see the hallway. Everyone in the room saw the elevator doors open at 10:14 a.m. I stepped out. I was wearing the ivory wool suit I'd bought in Milan 2 years ago at a trade conference. Structured shoulders, clean lines, the kind of suit that says, I did not dress for a funeral because this is not a funeral. My hair was up, my makeup was flawless. I was carrying my leather portfolio and a coffee from the place on Burnside that I stopped at every morning when I came into the office. I looked, in other words, like someone who had slept 9 hours and was having a perfectly normal Wednesday. Behind me, Eleanor Voss, in charcoal gray, leather briefcase, reading glasses already on. And 1 step behind Eleanor, Nathan Cole, in a dark jacket carrying a black architect's tube that I knew contained the physical master drawings for all 3 of our active projects. I watched Daniel see us through the glass. I watched the color leave his face. I watched him look at Nathan, specifically at the architect's tube, and I watched something shift in his expression that went beyond shock. It was the look of someone who has just identified the specific mistake that is going to cost them everything and cannot do anything about it. I pushed open the conference room door. I apologize for the interruption, I said, to no one in particular, in the tone of someone who is not apologizing at all. I understand there's been some concern about my mental health this morning, so I wanted to come in and address it in person. The room was very quiet. Harold Whitfield looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at me. His expression was the complicated one of a man who is rapidly updating a set of assumptions he had arrived with and finding the update uncomfortable. Rebecca, he said carefully, Daniel indicated you were... I saw the email, I said. I walked to the far end of the table. Not Daniel's end, not the chairman's end. The seat I always occupied when I attended board meetings as the company's founder, 3 seats from the head, right in front of the east window. I sat down, opened my portfolio, and set it on the table. I have to say, Daniel, it's an impressive piece of writing, Very concerned, very magnanimous. The part where you described taking on the burden of leadership was particularly moving. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rebecca, you shouldn't be here. You need to address my board, I said. That's what I need. I looked at Harold, then at each of the other board members in turn. Not challenging, just present, just clear. I am not having a mental health crisis, I said. What I am having is a divorce. My husband was discovered yesterday in my home engaged in an extramarital relationship with my sister. I removed both of them from the property with police assistance. That is the incident Daniel referenced in his email. A board member on my left, Patricia Wren, the only other woman on the board who had always been quietly supportive in the way of someone who understands what it costs to be underestimated, made a small sound that might have been, God. The police report is available, Eleanor said from her position near the door, holding up a manila folder, along with the audio recording, the property documentation, and the formal divorce filing, which was completed this morning. Harold looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at the table. Additionally, I said, I'd like to address the question of company leadership, since that appears to be on the agenda. I opened my portfolio and slid a single document to the center of the table. Eleanor simultaneously placed copies in front of each board member. This is the intellectual property licensing agreement that governs Thornton Green Design's use of its own brand name, design portfolio, and proprietary software tools. You'll notice it was executed in 2017, 3 years before Daniel joined the company, and 4 years before our marriage. Harold picked up the document and began reading. I watched his expression change as he reached the relevant clause. The name Thornton Green Design, the company logo, the Green Print software platform, and the full architectural design portfolio, including the Cascade Living Complex drawings, are personal intellectual property owned by Rebecca Thornton individually, Eleanor said, addressing the room. They are licensed to this corporation under a revocable agreement. The license fee is $1 per year. George Sinclair looked up from his copy. Revocable meaning that if the board votes to remove Rebecca as CEO, Eleanor said pleasantly, she retains the right to withdraw the license. At that point, the company would be legally prohibited from using its own name, its logo, its software, or any of the design work currently under contract. The silence that followed had a specific quality, the silence of 7 people simultaneously performing the same financial calculation and arriving at the same number. Patricia Wren said very quietly, the Cascade Project. $18 million in contracted work, I confirmed, plus the 2 secondary projects currently in development, all built on IP that belongs to me personally. Harold set down his copy of the licensing agreement. He looked at Daniel with the expression of a man who has just discovered that the person he trusted with something important left it on a park bench. Daniel, he said, and his voice had the flatness of someone who has moved past anger into something colder. Did you know about this agreement? Daniel's mouth opened. There was paperwork. Early on, I knew there was some kind of licensing structure, but I assumed that after we got married, the assets would... You assumed, Harold said. I thought, you're the COO. Harold's voice had the precise, clipped quality of a man who has built 3 companies from the ground up and has 0 patience for people who don't read documents before signing them. It is your operational responsibility to know the corporate structure of the company you run. You launched a leadership transition without verifying whether the company owned its own product. Daniel said nothing. Do you have any idea, Harold continued, what happens to our investment if those licenses are pulled? Do you have any concept of the liability we're looking at? Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 10:41 a.m. Nathan Cole had been standing near the east window since we'd entered, the architect's tube resting against his leg, his expression unreadable in the way it had been unreadable since yesterday afternoon. He had not spoken. He had not needed to speak. His presence in that room, standing behind me rather than beside Daniel, had communicated everything that needed communicating. But now he moved. He set the architect's tube on the table. The sound of it settling onto the reclaimed wood was quiet but precise, and it drew every eye in the room. Mr. Whitfield, Nathan said, you asked about the Cascade project. Harold looked at him. I did. The master drawings for Cascade, both physical and digital, are in this tube and on this drive. Nathan placed a slim, hard drive next to the tube. The structural calculations, the zoning approval documentation, and the sustainability certification files. I pulled them from the archive this morning. He paused. I'm the lead architect on all 3 active projects. I've been at this company for 3 years. I've put more hours into Cascade than any other person in this building, including Rebecca. He said this not with pride, but with the flat, factual quality of a man establishing his credentials before delivering a verdict. What I'm about to say, I want the record to reflect, has nothing to do with my personal situation and everything to do with this company and the people who work here. He reached into his jacket, produced a white envelope, slid it down the table to Harold. That's my resignation letter, Nathan said, effective immediately, contingent on the outcome of this meeting. Harold stared at the envelope. Nathan, I'm not finished. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, and turned it to face the room. On the screen was a document, a list of names, 31 of them, in 2 columns. These are the members of the senior design and engineering team who have indicated they will resign if Daniel Hartley is confirmed as CEO. Senior architects, structural engineers, the sustainability research team, the project managers for all 3 active projects. He set the phone on the table. 31 people, he said. All of them will be walking out by noon today if this board makes the wrong call. George Sinclair made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cough. You can't just... We can, Nathan said, looking at him directly. We don't have non-competes. Rebecca made a point of not including them in employment contracts because she believed that people should stay because they want to, not because they're legally trapped. That decision may cost her in the short term. He glanced at me briefly. But the people on that list aren't leaving for a competitor. They're leaving because they refuse to work for someone who got the job by attempting to defame the person who built this place. The room was very still. Harold looked at the list, then at the architect's tube, then at me. Rebecca, he said. And his voice had changed. The careful neutrality of a chairman managing a crisis had given way to something more direct. If we confirm you as CEO, is the licensing agreement intact? Yes, I said. And the team stays? I looked at Nathan. He gave the smallest possible nod. The team stays, I said. Harold looked at Daniel one more time. Daniel was staring at Nathan's phone, at the list of 31 names, with the expression of a man counting the cost of something he had not thought would cost this much. I'd like to call a vote, Harold said. The vote took 4 minutes. 7 board members. The motion, to confirm Rebecca Thornton as CEO of Thornton Green Design and to initiate termination proceedings against Daniel Hartley under the conduct clause of his employment contract. The result? 6-1. George Sinclair voted against. He had the grace to look at the table when he did it, which told me he knew exactly what he was doing and wasn't proud of it. I made a note of that for later. Everyone else voted yes. Harold Whitfield pressed the call button on the conference room console. Tyler, can you send Marcus up to the conference room, please? Daniel stood up. His chair scraped back with a sound like something tearing. This is not over, he said. His voice was shaking. Not with grief, I noticed, but with the specific vibration of a man whose self-image is collapsing faster than he can reconstruct it. I will contest this. I have an employment contract. You cannot terminate me without cause and expect me to just... The email you sent this morning, Eleanor said from her position near the door, constitutes defamation of a company officer using company communications infrastructure. That's cause. We've already filed the documentation. I'll sue. You're welcome to, I said. Your severance would have been substantial. The conduct clause voids it entirely. I'd suggest speaking with a personal attorney before deciding whether litigation is the right investment. Daniel looked at me across the long reclaimed wood table, the table I'd chosen in the building I'd built in the company I'd founded, and I watched him understand, fully and finally, that there was no version of this conversation he was going to win. The conference room doors opened. Tyler Brooks appeared, accompanied by 2 members of our building security team. Mr. Hartley, Tyler said, with the careful professionalism of someone who is 29 years old and handling this with considerably more grace than the situation required, I'll need your key card and your company phone. Daniel looked at Tyler. He looked at the security team. He looked at me, and then, with the stiff, furious dignity of a man performing composure he does not feel, he took his key card from his wallet and placed it on the table. His company phone followed. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped, and for a moment, I thought he was going to say something worth remembering, something that would have meaning in retrospect, something honest, or even just human. Instead, he said, "You'll regret this, Rebecca." "Maybe," I said. He left. The room exhaled. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 11:20 a.m. The thing about being escorted out of a building by security is that there is no dignified version of it. It doesn't matter how expensive your suit is or how straight you hold your shoulders. The moment two people in security uniforms appear at your elbow and indicate the direction of the exit, the visual communication is complete and irreversible. Word travels in offices the way it always travels, faster than any official announcement, carried on the specific current of people who are trying to look like they aren't paying attention while paying extremely close attention. By the time Tyler and the security team arrived in the lobby with Daniel, every person on the floor had found a reason to be somewhere with a sightline to the elevators. I took the stairs. I was already in the lobby when the elevator opened. Daniel stepped out and saw me standing near the reception desk. He stopped walking for just a moment, the involuntary pause of someone who expected to be unobserved and finds instead an audience. "The car," I said. He looked at me. "The Audi is in the company's name, Daniel. The lease payments come out of the operating account. You know that." His jaw worked. "You cannot be serious. Tyler will drive you wherever you need to go, or we can call you a rideshare. Either is fine." "I am not..." He stopped himself, looked around the lobby, looked at the small, scattered audience of employees who were very intently doing other things, looked back at me. He reached into his pocket, took out the Audi key fob, set it on the reception desk. The sound it made when it hit the marble was very small. "We're done," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "We are." He walked through the revolving glass doors and out into the gray November morning. I watched him go. Then I turned to Tyler, who was standing 2 feet away, looking like someone who had just watched a controlled demolition and was still processing it. "Send the access revocation to all systems," I said. And Tyler, "Thank you for everything this morning," he nodded. Then, "Rebecca, for what it's worth, none of us believed the email. Not for a second." I looked at him for a moment. "That means more than you know," I said. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 12:47 p.m. I ate lunch at my desk for the first time in months. Not because I was hiding, because I was hungry and there was actual work to do, and the particular stillness of the office after a morning like that one. Everyone back at their desks, the low productive hum of people who have processed something large and returned, slightly changed to their normal functions, felt like something I wanted to stay inside for a while. Tyler had brought me a sandwich from the place on Couch Street that I liked. He set it on my desk without comment, which was exactly the right call. I ate half of it while reviewing the Cascade Project milestone report that had been sitting in my inbox since Monday, made 3 notes in the margin, and sent it back to the engineering team with comments. Normal, deliberate, mine. At 12:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a Google alert. I had set up the alert in September, at Eleanor's suggestion, for my own name and the company name. It was a precaution, the kind of thing you do when you're preparing for a situation that might generate public attention and you want to know about it before someone else tells you. The alert read, "New result for Rebecca Thornton, Portland Business Tribune." I opened it. The headline was direct and unambiguous in the way that good business journalism sometimes is when the facts are doing the heavy lifting. Portland eco-design founder removes COO, husband from company and home, following alleged affair with sister. Board confirms CEO in emergency vote. The byline was Craig Mather, the Tribune's business desk editor, who I had spoken to exactly once before, a brief call at 6:03 that morning before I'd even finished my first espresso, during which I had provided him with the police report number, the board meeting time, and 3 specific factual details that I suggested he verify independently. I had not told him what to write. I had simply made sure that when he went looking, the right doors were open. The article was factual and measured. No melodrama, no speculation, just the documented sequence of events. The police report from the previous afternoon, confirmation from Harold Whitfield that an emergency board meeting had taken place, and that Daniel Hartley's employment had been terminated for cause. A note that the company's senior design team remained intact, and a single quoted line from Eleanor Voss. Ms. Thornton has full confidence in her team and looks forward to continuing the company's work. there was a photograph. It had been taken, apparently, by someone with a phone camera from across the street. Grainy, telephoto, but clear enough. Daniel standing on the sidewalk outside our building at 11:22 a.m., jacket over his arm, no keycard, no phone, no car. Looking like exactly what he was. I looked at the photograph for a moment, then I forwarded the article to Eleanor with a single line. This should be useful for the termination documentation. Her response came back in 40 seconds. Already filed. Also, check LinkedIn. I opened LinkedIn. The article had been shared 14 times in the 40 minutes since it was published, predominantly by people in the Pacific Northwest architecture and design community. The comments were, with 2 exceptions, not favorable to Daniel. Several people I had worked with over the years had added their own brief notes. Rebecca Thornton is the real deal. Thornton Green Design is in good hands, that kind of thing. The second to last comment, posted 8 minutes ago by someone I didn't recognize, simply said, "This is why you read the prenup before you sign it." There was no prenup, but the sentiment was accurate enough. I closed LinkedIn, finished the second half of my sandwich, and went back to the Cascade report. At 1:15 p.m., my assistant knocked on the open office door. "Rebecca, your parents are in the lobby." I set down my pen. "Both of them?" "Yes." "Your mom is... she seems pretty upset. Do you want me to call security or..." "No," I said. "Send them up. And can you ask Tyler to come in as well, just to be in the building?" She nodded and left. I straightened the papers on my desk, took a breath, reminded myself of something Eleanor had said to me in September in our second meeting, when I had expressed uncertainty about how far I was willing to take this. "Rebecca, the people who will make you feel guilty for protecting yourself are always the same people who benefited from you not protecting yourself. Keep that in mind." I kept it in mind. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 1:23 p.m. My parents arrived in my office doorway like a weather system. My mother in front, moving with the compressed velocity of someone who has been furious since yesterday afternoon and has had 18 hours to let it pressurize. My father behind her, doing the thing he had always done in moments of family conflict, which was to position himself close enough to appear present and far enough back to avoid being asked to take a side. Margaret Thornton was 61 years old and had the bearing of a woman who had decided at some point in her 40s that elegance was a form of armor and had not taken it off since. She was wearing a camel coat and pearl earrings at 1:15 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, which was either impressive or exhausting, depending on how you looked at it. She did not wait for me to speak. "I cannot believe," she said, walking into my office without being invited, "that you would do this to your sister, to this family, in public." "Hi, Mom," I said. "Don't hi, Mom me. There is an article." She held up her phone. The Portland Business Tribune headline was clearly visible on the screen. "Craig Mather called your father this morning for a comment. Did you know that? Your father. As if this is some kind of... Did Dad give a comment?" Robert Thornton, 64 years old, wearing the expression he always wore during these conversations, vaguely pained, vaguely apologetic, fundamentally uncommitted, cleared his throat. I told him no comment. "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank him," Margaret said sharply. "He shouldn't have needed to be put in that position. None of us should be in this position, Rebecca. This is a private family matter, and you have made it..." "Sit down, Mom." She blinked. I said it again quietly. "Please sit down. Both of you." Something in my voice, or possibly the fact that I had not raised it, had not matched her energy, had simply stated a direction and waited, made her pause. She looked at the chairs across from my desk. She sat. My father sat beside her, perching on the edge of the seat in the way of someone who hasn't fully committed to being in the room. I folded my hands on the desk. "I'm going to say some things," I told them. "And I'd like you to listen before you respond. Can you do that?" Margaret's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "Savannah slept with my husband. Not once. Based on the location data Nathan's attorney has documented multiple times over a period of at least 8 months, including 3 times in this house while I was traveling for work." I kept my voice level and factual, the same way I delivered difficult news to clients. That is what happened. Not a moment of weakness, not a misunderstanding. A sustained, deliberate choice made by 2 people who both knew exactly what they were doing. My mother opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said. She closed it. When I removed Daniel and Savannah from my home yesterday, I did so legally, with proper documentation, and with police present to ensure the process was orderly. I did not hurt anyone. I did not destroy anyone's property. I protected my legal rights in my own home. The article this morning is a factual account of what happened at this company today, a company that employs 47 people and that I am responsible for. The board needed to act. They acted. I paused. What I need you both to understand is this. I am not asking for your permission. I am not asking for your approval. I am not asking you to choose sides, though I notice you've already chosen. I looked at my mother directly. What I am asking is that you do not come into my workplace and make this harder than it already is. Margaret had been holding herself very still during this. Now she exhaled a long, controlled breath and said, "She is your sister, Rebecca." I know who she is. She has nothing. As she lost her job this morning, Tyler Brooks sent her a formal suspension notice before 9 o'clock. She was suspended pending an HR review of conduct that occurred on company property involving a company officer, I said. That's standard procedure. It wasn't punitive, it was procedural. She lost her apartment deposit because the landlord saw the article. Mom. And Nathan's attorney sent a letter this morning about the car, which apparently she was driving under a lease you co-signed, and now they're saying, Mom. My voice was still level, but there was something in it now that made her stop. Not volume, but wait. Do you hear yourself? Your daughter, your other daughter, discovered her husband with her sister in her own home, and you are sitting in her office telling her about apartment deposits. Silence. My father looked at the floor. My mother looked at me, and for just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, I saw something shift in her expression, something that might have been shame or the precursor to it, moving through her features before she could arrange them back into position. Then it was gone. I just think, she said more quietly, that there was a way to handle this that didn't have to destroy everyone. There was, I agreed. Savannah and Daniel could have not done what they did. That was the way. She had nothing to say to that. I stood up. I have work to do, I said. You're welcome to stay in Portland as long as you need to, but I won't be available for calls or visits for the next several days. Eleanor Voss will be handling all communications related to the divorce and asset proceedings. If Savannah needs legal guidance, she should get her own attorney. I walked to the office door and held it open. My father stood up first, and as he passed me, he stopped briefly and looked at me with the complicated expression of a man who knows he has failed someone and can't quite bring himself to say it directly. Rebecca, he said. Dad. A pause. I'm sorry, he said very quietly. I should have. Last night, when your mother called, I should have said something different. It wasn't enough. We both knew it wasn't enough, but it was the most honest thing he had said to me in years, and I recognized it for what it was. I know, I said. Thank you for saying it. He nodded and walked out. My mother passed me without speaking. At the elevator, she turned and looked back, and I could see her assembling something, a final word, a last salvo, and then apparently deciding against it. The elevator opened, they got in, the doors closed. I went back to my desk and sat down. My hands were steady. My breathing was normal. I realized, with a kind of distant surprise, genuinely okay. Not happy, not triumphant, just okay. Which, given everything, felt like its own kind of victory. Friday, November 17th, 2023, 9 a.m. Eleanor's office occupied the 14th floor of a building on Southwest 5th that had been built in the 1920s and still had the original terrazzo floors and the heavy mahogany trim that made it feel, depending on your situation, either reassuringly solid or oppressively formal. The conference room where mediations were conducted had 3 tall windows overlooking the city, and a table long enough to establish clear territorial distance between the parties sitting at either end. I arrived at 8:45. I wanted to be in the room before Daniel. I was. I sat at the far end of the table with Eleanor to my right and a legal pad in front of me that I didn't need but found useful as a prop. Something to look at when I needed to control my expression. I poured water from the carafe on the table. I reviewed the document summary Eleanor had prepared. I breathed. At 9:03, the door opened. Daniel came in first, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. Charcoal, slightly shiny, the kind of off-the-rack approximation of a good suit that reads differently when you know what the real thing looks like. Behind him was his attorney, a man named Philip Ward, maybe 50, with the tired eyes and slightly loose tie of someone who had been doing divorce mediations for 20 years and had decided somewhere around year 12 to stop caring very much about any of them. Savannah came in after them. She was wearing a gray blazer and dark jeans, a more subdued version of her usual style, clearly calibrated for the occasion. Her hair was pulled back. She looked tired in a way that her usual presentation usually didn't permit. Last through the door, my mother. Margaret Thornton had apparently decided that her role in this proceeding was moral ballast or possibly referee, or possibly simply that she could not tolerate being excluded from something this significant. She had not been invited. Eleanor looked at her with the expression of someone observing an uninvited guest at a table that had been very precisely set. "Mrs. Thornton," Eleanor said, "this is a private mediation. I'm afraid—" "I'm here for emotional support," Margaret said, sitting down next to Savannah with the settled authority of someone who has decided the matter is closed. Eleanor looked at me. I gave the smallest possible shrug. Let her stay. It would be better in the end for her to see it directly. "Fine," Eleanor said. "Let's begin." Philip Ward opened his folder with the practiced efficiency of a man who had a system and intended to follow it regardless of context. "My client's position is straightforward," he said. "Under Oregon community property principles, assets accumulated during the marriage are subject to equitable division. Based on Thornton Green Design's revenue reports for fiscal years 2021 through 2023, and accounting for Daniel's salary contributions and operational role during that period, we estimate the marital estate to be valued at approximately $9 to $12 million. We are requesting a lump sum settlement of $5 million, return of personal items including the Patek Philippe watch, the Porsche Cayenne. The Porsche is leased in the company's name," Eleanor said, "and reasonable spousal support for a period of 36 months while Daniel establishes himself professionally." Philip closed the folder with the air of someone who has delivered a verdict rather than opened a negotiation. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He had the look of a man who has made himself believe in a number, who has spent the last 2 days living inside the reality of $5 million the way you live inside a decision you've already made, furnishing the mental rooms, planning the life, spending the money in small, deliberate increments in your imagination. And who needs that number to be real? "I think that's fair," he said, to no one in particular. "I mean, we built this together. That's the truth of it. Whatever happened personally, I was part of that company. I contributed. The Cascade project, the client relationships I managed, the operational infrastructure I set up, that has value." My mother nodded beside Savannah. Savannah was looking at the table. $5 million, Daniel said again, more firmly. "That's reasonable. That's less than half." I let him finish. I let the silence after he finished run for about 4 seconds. Long enough for the number to fully inhabit the room, for everyone present to feel the weight of it as a real thing being seriously considered. Then I looked at Eleanor. She opened the banker's box. The box contained 4 separate sets of documents, each clipped together and labeled with a tab. Eleanor placed them on the table one at a time, with the unhurried deliberation of someone laying out evidence at a proceeding where the outcome is already determined, but the process still matters. "Let's talk about the marital estate," Eleanor said. "Specifically, what it actually contains." She slid the first set across to Philip Ward. He picked it up and began reading, and I watched his expression shift. Not dramatically, just a subtle recalibration. The face of a professional updating a position. "The intellectual property licensing agreement," Eleanor said, "which the board reviewed on Wednesday, establishes that the company's primary revenue-generating assets, the Thornton Green Design brand, the Greenprint software platform, and the complete design portfolio, are personal property owned by Rebecca individually, registered prior to the marriage. These assets are not part of the marital estate and are not subject to division." Daniel frowned. "But the company revenue..." "The company revenue is the company's. Rebecca draws a salary. Her annual salary during the marriage was $140,000. That salary is a marital asset. We're happy to divide it." "She made way more than..." "Her salary was $140," Eleanor said. "The company's revenue is not Rebecca's personal income. The company is a separate legal entity." Philip Ward had put down the first document and picked up the second. He was reading faster now, with the focused attention of someone doing damage assessment. The second document, Eleanor continued, is a summary of the Thornton Education Trust activity for fiscal years 2020 through 2023. The trust is an irrevocable charitable organization established in 2018 prior to the marriage under Section 501(c)(3) of the Internal Revenue Code. Each year, net profits from Rebecca's company equity, beyond her salary and a modest reserve, are automatically transferred to the trust. She paused. In the 4 years of the marriage, those automatic transfers totaled approximately $2.1 million. Those funds have been dispersed to educational programs and are not recoverable. They are not marital property. They never entered a personal account. Daniel was very still. The current balance of the joint marital savings account, Eleanor said, sliding the third document across the table, is $14,260. A long silence. Daniel looked at the bank statement. His eyes moved to the bottom line, moved back up, moved to the bottom line again, as if the number might change on a second reading. That's, he said, that can't be. It is, Eleanor said. Equitable division of the liquid marital estate amounts to $7,130 each. We've prepared a check. My mother made a sound. Not a word, just a sound, involuntary, the auditory equivalent of a floor dropping out. Savannah looked up from the table for the first time since the mediation began. She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a very long time. Not the performative emotions she usually deployed in difficult situations, but something stripped down and genuine, and in it I could see the specific quality of someone finally understanding something they had been refusing to understand. Daniel pushed the bank statement away from him like it had done something to him personally. "You hit it," he said. His voice was low and had an unsteady quality, the wobble of someone whose narrative is collapsing under them. "You hid the money in the charity. That's fraud. Philip, that's fraudulent concealment, right? She deliberately structured the finances to... The trust was established in 2018, Philip said, without looking up from the documents. His voice had the flat quality of a man doing arithmetic. 2 years before she met you. The transfer mechanism has been operating since before the marriage. There's no concealment. There's a pre-existing financial structure you weren't aware of. Because she didn't tell me. Did you ask? I said. He looked at me. Did you ever ask in 4 years of marriage how the company's finances were structured? Did you ever ask to review the founding documents, the trust declarations, the IP agreements? I kept my voice genuinely curious rather than accusatory because the question was genuine. I would have told you, Daniel, any of it. You never asked. He stared at me. You were so comfortable, I said quietly. The house, the car, the dinners, the watch, it all just existed, and you let it exist, and you assumed it would keep existing, and you never once thought to look at the architecture underneath it. A pause. That's what I do, by the way, I said. I'm an architect. I think about what's underneath things. I always have. Friday, November 17th, 2023, 10:19 a.m. Philip Ward was packing his folder with the focused efficiency of a man preparing to exit a situation that had not developed the way his client had described it would develop. He had not said anything for approximately 6 minutes. This was, I suspected, a record for him. Daniel had moved through several emotional registers in those 6 minutes. Disbelief, calculation, renewed aggression, and was now somewhere between resignation and the specific desperation of someone who has just realized they have one card left and are trying to decide whether to play it. He played it. Okay, he said. He straightened up in his chair, and I could see him assembling something, reclaiming the posture of a man with leverage. Okay, so the savings are... Fine, that's fine. But there are other assets, the joint credit account, the home improvement loans from 2022. Whatever I put on those cards during the marriage is community debt, Rebecca. 50-50. That's the law. He looked at Philip, who gave a barely perceptible nod. Yes, technically, community debt in a marriage is shared liability. So if you want a clean split, Daniel continued, and there was something almost triumphant returning to his voice, the tone of someone who has found the escape hatch. We're going to have to account for all of it. Both sides, and some of that debt. Let's talk about the debt, Eleanor said. She placed the fourth document on the table. It was thicker than the others. This is the forensic accounting report prepared by our financial investigator over the past 6 weeks, Eleanor said. It covers all financial activity in accounts accessible to Daniel during the marriage. Philip picked it up. He had stopped packing. The joint credit card, which Daniel referenced, has a current balance of $41,000. $17,000 of that balance represents household expenses, groceries, utilities, home maintenance. Those are shared marital expenditures, and Rebecca acknowledges joint responsibility. She paused. The remaining $24,000 breaks down as follows: 11 hotel charges at properties in Oregon and Washington, 8 restaurant charges at establishments Rebecca has confirmed she did not attend, 4 charges at La Belle Boutique on Southwest Broadway, and various cash advances and gift purchases that do not correspond to any joint household purpose. The room was very quiet. Under Oregon law, Eleanor said, when a spouse uses marital funds for an extramarital relationship, those expenditures are classified as dissipation of marital assets. The court has discretion to assign full responsibility for dissipated assets to the dissipating party. $24,000 isn't, Daniel started. We're not finished, Eleanor said. She opened a second section of the report. In reviewing Daniel's personal financial history, our investigator identified 3 personal loans taken out in Daniel's name during the marriage. These loans were not disclosed to Rebecca and were not used for any joint marital purpose. She slid a summary page across the table. Daniel looked at it. Something happened to his face. A personal loan of $80,000 from Pacific Northwest Lending taken out in March 2022, Eleanor read. A personal loan of $60,000 from Cascade Financial Partners taken out in September 2022, and a private lending arrangement, she paused briefly on the phrasing, for $140,000 from an entity called Apex Capital Solutions, executed in January 2023. What did you do with it? Savannah said. It was the first thing she had said since the mediation began. Her voice was very quiet and very flat, and she was looking at Daniel with an expression that had nothing left in it of the woman who had arrived at this table 30 minutes ago. Daniel did not answer immediately. Daniel, her voice was harder now. What did you do with $280,000? I invested it, he said. Crypto. The market was different in 2022. It's gone, Philip said. He had been reading the report while Daniel spoke. He looked up. His voice had the flatness of professional resignation. All of it. The accounts are at a combined negative value after the lending fees. Apex Capital Solutions, Eleanor said, charges 38% annual interest on private lending arrangements. The current outstanding balance on that loan alone with accrued interest is $214,000. My mother had gone completely still beside Savannah. She was staring at Daniel with the expression of someone who has just found something in a coat pocket they had no idea was there. You're broke, Savannah said. She said it the way you state a fact about weather, without particular emotion, just the flat recognition of reality. You showed me the account statements. You said, those were the company accounts, Daniel said. I thought I was going to pay it back before what? Her voice had an edge now. Before you got your $5 million from Rebecca? Was that the plan? Savannah, don't. She said it the same way Nathan had said it 2 days ago. Quiet, absolute, with no room in it. Don't. The silence that followed had a specific quality. It was the silence of several people simultaneously revising their understanding of a situation they thought they understood. Since we are pursuing a full equitable division of the marital estate, Eleanor said, her voice cutting cleanly through the silence, we must include all community liabilities. The personal loans Daniel identified were taken out during the marriage. Under Oregon law, debt incurred during a marriage is presumed to be community debt unless the borrowing spouse can demonstrate it was for a non-marital purpose. She looked at Philip. Given that these funds were lost entirely through personal investment activity, not used for any joint marital benefit, we will be challenging the community debt classification in court. However, for purposes of this mediation, we are prepared to offer an immediate settlement of Rebecca's portion of any debt a court might assign to her. She opened the portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper. Rebecca is prepared to transfer 50,000 shares of Thornton Green Design stock to Daniel, representing being her proportional share of the maximum potential joint debt liability. Based on Daniel's own valuation, presented in his initial settlement demand, these shares are worth approximately $300,000, more than covering the hypothetical community debt share. And she placed the transfer certificate on the table. In exchange, Daniel waives all further claims to marital assets, spousal support, and company interest. Philip read the certificate. He read it again. "The stock," he said carefully. "With the IP licensing agreement in effect, the stock represents equity in the corporate entity," Eleanor confirmed. "The corporate entity's assets consist of office equipment, the building lease, and the client contracts currently in force. The intellectual property remains with Rebecca personally. So the stock is worth what the market assigns to a design firm without its design portfolio, its brand name, or its software platform." Philip closed his folder. He looked at Daniel with the expression of someone who has a professional obligation to deliver bad news and is deciding how to phrase it. "Daniel," he said, "I need to speak with you privately." "Just tell me," Daniel said. Philip set the folder on the table. "The stock she's offering you covers the debt liability on paper, but if you accept it and try to liquidate, you'll get cents on the dollar because the company's revenue depends on assets she controls. If you reject it and go to court to fight the IP classification, you'll spend a minimum of 2 years and $150,000 in legal fees to achieve a result that is highly unlikely to go your way given the registration dates." He paused. "And the private lender isn't going to wait 2 years." Daniel looked at the transfer certificate. He looked at me. He looked at the certificate again. "What happens if I don't sign?" he asked. "You leave this room with your full share of the community debt," Eleanor said, "plus ongoing legal costs, plus the dissipated assets finding, which the court will very likely assign entirely to you." My mother reached across the table and put her hand on Savannah's arm. Savannah did not move. "Sign it, Daniel," Savannah said quietly. He looked at her. "Just sign it," she said. "It's over." Daniel picked up the pen. He held it for a moment over the transfer certificate, long enough that I thought he might put it back down, might find one more thing to say, one more performance to give. He didn't. He signed. Philip countersigned as witness. Eleanor collected the documents with the brisk efficiency of someone completing a process. And that was it. 4 years of marriage, hundreds of thousands of dollars, the better part of my 30s. Resolved in a signature on a sheet of paper at a table in a building on Southwest 5th on a gray Friday morning in November. I felt nothing dramatic, no relief, no grief, no triumph, just the specific, clean sensation of a thing being finished. I stood up, straightened my jacket. "Thank you all for your time," I said. I walked out of the room. Friday, November 17th, 2023, 10:52 a.m. Eleanor caught up with me at the elevator, portfolio under her arm, moving at the pace of someone who has places to be and is mildly amused by the pace of the universe around her. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. "Actually okay, not performing okay." "Good." The elevator arrived. We got in. Philip Ward called me last night, off the record. He said Daniel's private lender has been making contact, the Apex Capital people. "I know," I said. Tyler flagged it. They've been calling the company Mainline. They won't be calling the company much longer. Without the IP license, the company isn't much of an asset to go after. Eleanor pressed the lobby button. "Daniel is going to have a very difficult winter." I didn't say anything to that. "Savannah stayed behind," Eleanor added. "After you left, she asked the receptionist for a notepad. She was writing something when I came out." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. My parents were standing by the entrance, coats on, waiting. My father was holding the door for a woman with a stroller. My mother was looking at her phone. She looked up when the elevator opened. She looked at me, and I watched her face go through the same complicated recalibration it had gone through in my office on Wednesday. The process of a person updating a belief they have held for a very long time and finding the update uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. My father looked at me with the quiet, steadfast regret of a man who had spent too many years making the easier choice and was beginning to understand the cost of it. "Rebecca," he said. "Dad." "Are you—" "I'm good," I said. "I promise." He nodded. Something in his face shifted. Not resolution exactly, but the beginning of it. The sense of a person deciding slowly and privately that the easy choice had run its course. I walked past them, through the glass doors, out into the gray Portland November. The air was cold and clean. The kind of cold that doesn't make you want to be inside. The kind that reminds you that your lungs work and the world is large and you are, despite everything, still here. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Just stood there. Then I put my hands in my coat pockets, turned right, and walked in the direction of my office. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And for the first time in longer than I could measure, that felt like a gift rather than a weight. Late November 2023. The week after the mediation had the particular quality of a city after a storm. Not peaceful exactly, but cleared. The air different. The usual topography of things shifted slightly, some debris still visible at the edges, but the sky open in a way it hadn't been before. I went back to work on Monday morning, the 20th of November, and nobody said anything about the previous week directly. This was the right call, and I was grateful for it. Tyler had sent a brief company-wide email on Friday afternoon. 3 sentences, no drama, confirming that the leadership situation was resolved, that all active projects were proceeding on schedule, and that Rebecca Thornton remained CEO. Period. Done. The Monday morning I walked back in, people looked up from their desks and either nodded or said good morning and went back to what they were doing, and that normalcy, that deliberate collective choice to treat me as a person returning to work rather than a protagonist returning from an ordeal, was one of the kindest things anyone had done for me in a long time. I sat at my desk. I opened the Cascade project file. I worked. Around 11 o'clock, Tyler appeared in my doorway with 2 coffees and the Access audit report he'd been compiling since Wednesday morning. Everything's clean, he said, setting the report on my desk. He didn't take anything. I think he genuinely didn't understand the systems well enough to know what was worth taking. That tracks, I said. Tyler set the second coffee next to the first. For what it's worth, and I know you didn't ask, I think the team is okay. Like, actually okay. A few people were shaken up by the email on Wednesday morning, but once the vote came through and Nathan's team stayed, it settled pretty fast. How's the mood? Honestly, better than it's been in about a year. He said this carefully, like someone deciding mid-sentence to be more honest than they'd planned to be. I don't know if this is overstepping, but I think people felt the tension for a while, the last year or so. And they didn't know where it was coming from, but they felt it. And now it's just gone. I looked at my coffee. It's not overstepping, I said. Thank you for telling me. He left. I sat with that for a moment. The idea that the thing I had been carrying, the thing I'd been so careful to contain and manage and not let spill into the workspace, had been perceptible anyway. That the people around me had been living in the ambient pressure of a secret they didn't know and feeling its weight without understanding its source. I thought about the months of careful misdirection, the energy I'd spent on maintaining the surface while the foundations were crumbling, the particular exhaustion of performing normalcy with someone who is actively betraying you. And I thought, never again. Not the betrayal. I couldn't control that. But the performance, the staying, the choosing the appearance of a thing over the reality of it because the reality was inconvenient or painful or embarrassing. Never again. I opened the Cascade file and got back to work. The day settled into a new rhythm, different from before, not better or worse in every dimension, just different, with different textures and different weights. I was in the office more consistently than I had been in over a year, and I noticed gradually how much I had been avoiding it. How many mornings I had found reasons to work from home or take the first meeting remotely or push my arrival to 10 or 11 because the office had Daniel in it, and being in the same space as Daniel had required a sustained, low-level expenditure of energy that I'd stopped noticing only because it was constant. Now I arrived at 8:30, made coffee, stood at the east window for 5 minutes watching the city come alive, and felt nothing but the clean anticipation of a workday. The Cascade project moved into its next phase without incident. The structural engineers submitted revised load calculations on the 22nd. The zoning variance for the secondary access point was approved on the 28th. Nathan ran the weekly design review on the 30th with the focused competence that made everyone in the room better at their jobs, and at the end of it, he looked at me across the table and gave the same small nod he always gave when things were on track, and I gave it back, and we both went back to our desks. We did not talk about the personal situation. Not directly, not yet. There was an understanding between us, wordless, mutually arrived at, that the professional space needed to be exactly that, and that anything else could wait until the dust had settled enough to approach it clearly. I respected that. So did he. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with 3 friends, people from outside the industry, people who knew me as Rebecca rather than as a founder or a CEO or a cautionary tale. And we made too much food and watched bad television, and nobody mentioned Daniel or Savannah or the Portland Business Tribune article at all, and that was exactly what I needed. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, I went into the empty office alone and worked for 6 hours straight, and when I left at 7 p.m., I locked the door behind me and stood on the sidewalk in the Pearl District evening and felt, with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, that this thing I had built was genuinely, fundamentally mine. Not because Daniel was gone, because I had looked at it clearly, for the first time in a long time, without the distortion of trying to include him in it. It had always been mine. I had just stopped seeing it that way. Early December 2023. Nathan called on a Tuesday in the first week of December. Not a text, a call, which was slightly unusual because Nathan communicated the way he designed. With precision and economy, no unnecessary elements, text for logistics, calls for things that required more. "Are you free for coffee tomorrow morning?" he said. "Not a work thing. I have something I want to talk through and I'd rather do it outside the office." "Sure," I said. "The place on Burnside?" 7:30. "See you there." I spent approximately 30 seconds after hanging up wondering what he wanted to talk about, then decided I would find out in the morning and went back to the structural report I'd been reading. He was already there when I arrived. He had ordered for both of us, which was a Nathan thing. He had a very good memory, and he knew I took my coffee black, no sugar. He was looking at something on his phone and set it face down when I sat down, which was another Nathan thing. Full attention. "How are you doing?" he asked. Not the casual version of the question, the real one. "Better than I expected to be," I said, which I think is its own kind of answer. "You?" He was quiet for a moment. Nathan Cole processed things the way tectonic plates move, slowly, with enormous force, producing significant results. He never performed reflection. He just did it. "I'm okay," he said. "The hard part it's not the betrayal, actually, or not mostly. The hard part is the recalibration. I had a version of my life that I was building toward, and now I'm building toward something else. And for a while, you have to exist in the gap between the two things. The gap is uncomfortable, deeply." A pause. But also kind of clarifying. You know what you actually want when what you thought you wanted turns out to be something else. I understood that, more than he probably knew. "What do you actually want?" I asked. He looked at me steadily. "That's what I wanted to talk about." He laid it out the way he laid out every design proposal, methodically, with the underlying structure visible before the surface detail, so that you understood the logic before you evaluated the aesthetics. He wanted to build something, not for someone else's vision, not as an employee executing someone else's brief, but something with his own design philosophy at its center. He had been thinking about affordable, sustainable housing for 3 years, genuinely affordable, built for families who couldn't access the premium eco-development market that Thornton Green Design operated in. And he had ideas that he had never been in a position to pursue because the work had always pulled in a different direction. He didn't want to leave Thornton Green Design. He wanted to do both, continue as lead architect, continue with Cascade and the projects in the pipeline, but establish a parallel entity that could pursue a different kind of work. And he wanted a partner. "I've been thinking about who that would be," he said. "The business side of it, the strategic structure, the client relationships, the financial architecture. That's not my strength. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not." "And you're asking me," I said. "I'm asking you." I looked at my coffee for a moment. The honest answer was that I had been thinking about something similar for about 2 years, a smaller, more nimble entity, less corporate overhead, focused on the kind of work that the Thornton Green Design brand was sometimes too polished to accommodate. Community projects, smaller scale, higher impact per dollar, the kind of architecture that doesn't get photographed for German design magazines, but changes the material conditions of people's lives. 50-50, I said, real 50-50, not in name and 40 in practice. 50-50, he confirmed, separate entity, separate contracts, separate liability. No ambiguity about ownership. And we put everything in writing before we start. Every decision protocol, every exit clause, every contingency. Agreed. Because I just finished doing this with someone who didn't read the documents, I said, and I would very much like to not do that again. Something shifted in Nathan's expression. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. I read documents, he said. I know you do. That's why I'm saying yes. The next 3 weeks were the most productive of my professional year. Eleanor drafted the partnership agreement for Meridian Build Studio, the name Nathan proposed, and which I liked for its lack of either of our surnames, its sense of something located between things, a midpoint, a meeting place. The agreement was 47 pages, and we read every one of them, individually and together, and we argued constructively about 4 clauses and resolved all 4 before the end of the month. Meridian Build Studio was formally registered in the state of Oregon on December 28, 2023. Nathan's design philosophy document, the thing he'd been carrying around in his head for 3 years and finally wrote down in 2 evenings in his apartment, was 16 pages of the clearest architectural thinking I had read in years. I added a 12-page strategic and financial framework. Together they formed the basis of our first investor presentation, which we gave to 3 people in the second week of January 2024. 2 of them said yes. The third said no, but his notes were useful, and we incorporated them before the next round. December 2023 to February 2024. The note Savannah had written in Eleanor's lobby on the day of the mediation reached me 10 days later, forwarded by Eleanor's receptionist in a plain envelope. It was handwritten on the notepad Eleanor kept at the reception desk. 5 lines on a small sheet of paper in Savannah's distinctive handwriting, which had always been better than mine, rounder and more careful. Rebecca. I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect anything from you. I'm not going to tell you I didn't know what I was doing, because I did. I'm not going to tell you I didn't think about what it would do to you, because I did think about it, and I did it anyway. That's the part I can't explain. I don't have an explanation that isn't an excuse. I'm sorry. For what that's worth coming from me right now, which I understand is probably not much. I read it once, sat with it for a few minutes. Put it in the drawer of my bedside table. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't ready, and I had learned enough about myself in the preceding weeks to know that acting before I was ready produced worse outcomes than waiting for clarity. What I felt reading it was complicated. Not forgiveness, not yet, not anything that resolved neatly. More like the first acknowledgement that the thing between us was not simply a closed door, but a damaged one, and that damaged doors are sometimes repairable if both people are willing to do the work, and neither of them is in a hurry. I was not in a hurry. My mother called in the second week of December. I had unblocked her number after Thanksgiving, not because anything had been resolved, but because permanent disconnection requires more certainty than I had, and because I had started to understand that what I wanted was not the absence of family, but a different version of it, one built on honesty rather than performance. She did not apologize directly. That was not Margaret Thornton's way. She had never in 61 years made a direct apology, and I had stopped expecting one sometime in my 20s. What she did instead was call and talk about other things: the weather in Bend, a neighbor's new dog, a documentary she'd watched about sustainable farming, in a tone that was carefully, deliberately normal. An offering of ordinary contact in place of the extraordinary contact that had preceded it. I accepted it, on its own terms, for what it was. My father called separately. 2 days later. He had never, in my memory, called me independently of my mother. He called now and said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "What have you been thinking about?" I asked. "About the kind of father I've been," he said. "The kind that takes the easy road. The kind that lets the person who makes the least noise absorb the most. I've been thinking that I did that to you for a long time, and I'm not proud of it." A long pause. "I'd like to do better," he said. "If you'll let me try?" I held the phone for a moment. Outside the window, the December rain was doing what December rain in Portland does, falling with a quiet, persistent commitment that is either meditative or oppressive depending on the state of your interior life. "I'd like that, Dad," I said. It wasn't a resolution. It was the beginning of one, which is a different and in some ways more honest thing. Resolutions are clean and complete. Beginnings are tentative and real. We talked for 20 minutes. about Meridian Build Studio, which I hadn't told him about yet, about a project his friend had done in rural Oregon that he thought might align with what Nathan and I were building, about a hike he was planning in the spring and whether I might want to come. Small things. Ordinary things. The tentative architecture of a relationship being rebuilt from the foundation up, one conversation at a time. March to August 2024. I kept the private investigator on retainer through the end of the divorce finalization process. There were several outstanding legal threads that required ongoing documentation, and Eleanor had advised maintaining surveillance until the final decree was signed. The final decree came through in March 2024. Oregon requires a 90-day waiting period after filing, and ours ran exactly 90 days. On the morning it was finalized, Eleanor sent me a one-line text. Done. Congratulations on your clean slate. I was in a site meeting for the East Portland project when the text arrived. I read it, put my phone back in my pocket, and went back to the discussion about the roofline specifications. There would be time to feel things about it later. Right now, there was a building to design. The investigator sent a final summary report in April. I had asked for it not out of any continuing interest in Daniel's life, but because there were still some outstanding questions about the Apex Capital loan and whether it created any residual liability for me, questions that Eleanor confirmed were resolved, but which I wanted documented clearly. Daniel had left Portland in late March. He had taken a position at a furniture showroom in Bellevue, Washington. A sales role, comfortable enough, representing the kind of mid-range design-adjacent product that bore no relationship to the work he'd claimed for 5 years to be his passion. The Apex Capital people had located him within 2 weeks of his move. His wages were being garnished. He was, by all available evidence, managing. Not thriving, not destroyed, managing. I looked at the report for about 4 minutes. Then I filed it in a folder labeled closed and put it away. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel guilty. I felt the specific neutrality of someone looking at a chapter that is genuinely, completely finished. Not suppressed, not unresolved, just done. The kind of done that doesn't require tending or revisiting. I closed the folder. I opened the Meridian quarterly projection spreadsheet. I went back to work. May 2024. She called on a Tuesday evening in May when the Portland spring was doing the thing it occasionally does in late May, producing a week of actual warmth and sunshine that makes you briefly believe the preceding 7 months of gray were a fever dream. I was on the back deck with a glass of wine when my phone rang. I saw the name and sat with it for a moment. Not hesitating exactly, just acknowledging the weight of the moment before stepping into it. I answered. "Hey," she said. "Hey." A pause. I'm not going to ask you for anything. I just want you to know that up front." "Okay." "I got a job." Her voice had a quality I didn't recognize immediately, something careful and slightly uncertain, the voice of someone who is not used to reporting good news because they are not used to having earned it. Marketing coordinator at a firm downtown, small place, design consulting. It's entry level and the pay it's a lot less than I was making before, but it's real. That's good, Savannah. I wanted you to know because you made the introduction. She meant the contact I had passed through my assistant in February, a brief message to a former colleague who I knew was building out a small team. I had not done it with fanfare or conditions. I had just done it. I didn't expect you to do that. I know, I said. Why did you? I thought about that for a moment. On the deck below, the garden was green in the late May evening, the peonies I planted the previous fall just beginning to open. "Because you're my sister," I said. "Not because of what happened. Not because you deserve a favor from me or because I'm over it or because things are fine. Just because you're my sister and I'm not interested in your failure." Silence. "I'm sorry, Rebecca." "I know." Not to get forgiveness, just because it's true. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm sorry for how long it went on, and I'm sorry that I knew it was wrong the whole time and did it anyway. The honesty of it. The absence of justification, the lack of the usual narrative architecture she had always deployed to explain herself, was different. I didn't know yet if it was permanent, if it was the beginning of a different version of Savannah, or a temporary clarity that would fade. I had learned enough by then to hold that uncertainty without needing to resolve it. "I hear you," I said. "That's all I wanted," she said. "I don't expect anything else. I just needed to say it to you directly. Not through a note, not through mom, to you. Thank you for that. Another pause. Then, how's the new company? Something opened slightly in my chest. Not dramatically, just slightly, like a window being cracked. It's good, I said. Really good, actually. I heard you got a big project. East Portland, 40 units, breaking ground next month. That's amazing. And her voice, saying it, had nothing in it but what it sounded like. Just genuine. That's really amazing, Rebecca. We talked for 11 more minutes. About the job, about a ceramics class she was taking, about a book she'd read. Small things, ordinary things. When we hung up, I sat on the deck for a long time in the May evening, the wine untouched, thinking about the difference between forgiveness and the beginning of something that might, with time and honesty and the willingness of both parties to do the hard work, eventually become something resembling it. They were not the same thing, but the beginning was real. And I had learned in the last 6 months to value real things over clean ones. June 2024 to October 2025. The East Portland project broke ground on June 14, 2024. It was a Friday morning, overcast with the kind of soft gray light that photographers love and Portlanders have stopped noticing. Nathan and I stood at the edge of the site in hard hats, a detail I always found slightly comic at these early stages, when the ground is still intact and the hard hat is more symbolic than protective, and watched the first equipment arrive. How does it feel? He asked. Like the beginning of something, I said. Yeah. He looked at the site for a moment. Me too. And the building that rose on that site over the following 9 months was 42 units of mixed income sustainable housing, 28 at market rate, 14 at 60% of area median income, built with cross-laminated timber, passive ventilation systems, and a rooftop community garden that Nathan had designed in close consultation with the neighborhood association. It was the most thoroughly collaborative building process I had been part of since I started the company, and the most satisfying. It was also, according to the structural engineer who consulted on the passive systems, technically the most elegant residential building she had worked on in 20 years of practice. She said this at the site walkthrough in February 2025, matter-of-factly, as if she were noting a measurement, and Nathan and I both heard it, and neither of us said anything for a moment, and then we both went back to reviewing the ventilation data. That was how things worked between us. The good things didn't need ceremony, they just needed acknowledgement. Thornton Green Design continued to operate and grow in parallel. The Cascade Living Complex opened in September 2024 to the kind of response that architecture projects occasionally receive, and that I had learned to accept with gratitude without letting it become the measure of the work's worth. A feature in Architectural Record, a profile in the Tribune's Weekend magazine, a Sustainable Design Award from the Pacific Northwest chapter of the AIA. I gave an acceptance speech for that award that was 4 minutes long, thanked Nathan and Tyler and the team by name, said something true about why sustainable design matters and what it costs to do it well, and sat down. George Sinclair was at the awards dinner. He had submitted the one dissenting vote in the board meeting. He approached me afterward with the look of a man who has been composing something for several months and has finally decided to deliver it. Rebecca, he said. George, I voted wrong, he said, in November. I knew it when I did it. Daniel and I let a personal relationship affect a professional judgment, and it was wrong. I looked at him. I appreciate you saying that. For what it's worth, I don't think it would have changed the outcome. It wouldn't have, I agreed. He nodded. Something settled in his expression. You've built something genuinely good here, he said. Both of them. I've been watching. I wanted you to know that. Thank you, George. He went back to his table. I went back to mine. Later, Eleanor, who had been watching from across the room, raised her glass of water in a small private toast in my direction. I raised mine back. The second Meridian project broke ground in January 2025 in the Lentz neighborhood. 60 units, a community health clinic on the ground floor, a partnership with a local nonprofit that had been trying to build affordable housing in that corridor for 6 years and kept running into funding walls. We provided the design and project management. The nonprofit brought the land and the community relationships. 2 investors from our second round provided the capital. Nathan presented the design at the Neighborhood Association meeting in October 2024. He had spent 3 months getting the community input right. Not performing community engagement, actually doing it, showing up to meetings, revising the design based on what he heard, showing up again. By the time the groundbreaking happened, the people who lived on the surrounding blocks knew the building by name before it was built and had opinions about the community garden layout that they had communicated directly and that Nathan had incorporated into the final design. That was the kind of architecture Meridian Build Studio was trying to do. Not the kind that wins awards by being beautiful to look at. The kind that works. By the spring of 2025, we had a third project in development, a partnership with a rural Oregon County government to design a small cluster of accessible housing units for elderly residents aging in place. Nathan drove out to the site 3 times before we submitted the proposal. I went with him on the second trip and spent the afternoon talking with 2 women in their 80s who had lived in the county their whole lives and had very specific opinions about kitchen layout, morning light, and the height of garden beds. I drove home that evening thinking that I had not felt that specific quality of rightness, the sense of work being connected to something real and human and consequential, in a long time, maybe ever. Thursday, October 16th, 2025, 6:30 p.m. The Hotel Lucia on Southwest Broadway has a ballroom on the second floor that was designed, apparently, by someone who understood that the best event spaces are the ones that make people feel slightly more significant than they do in ordinary life. High ceilings, warm lighting, the kind of acoustic balance that lets conversation happen without effort. I had been to 3 events there in the last 5 years. Each time I walked in, I thought the same thing. Whoever designed this room understood what rooms are for. Tonight it was set for 300 guests, round tables with white linens, a stage at the far end with a simple lectern and a screen. The annual Pacific Northwest Architecture and Innovation Awards, the PNAIA, pronounced by insiders either as the acronym or by people who had been in the industry long enough to find the acronym amusing simply as the awards, was the most significant night of the regional design calendar. Not because of the trophies, which were heavy glass things that looked impressive on a shelf, but because of who was in the room. Every significant architecture and design firm in the Pacific Northwest, plus the investors, city planners, and community organizations that form the ecosystem around them. Meridian Build Studio was nominated in 2 categories: Outstanding Community Impact Design for the East Portland Project, Emerging Practice of the Year for the firm itself. Nathan had called me that morning, characteristically matter-of-fact, calling to confirm logistics rather than to express anything about the significance of the evening, because Nathan expressed significance through showing up prepared rather than through commentary on the occasion. Lisa and I will meet you there at 6:45, he said. Lisa Marwood, a landscape architect he'd been seeing since the spring, was someone I had met 4 times and liked genuinely. She was precise and funny and seemed to understand, without requiring explanation, the specific nature of Nathan's version of warmth, which was real and substantial and communicated primarily through sustained attentiveness rather than demonstrative affection. "I'll be there at 6:30, I said. "I want to look at the room before it fills up." "Of course you do," he said, and there was something in it that wasn't quite teasing. More like the recognition of a person who has known you well enough and long enough to be unsurprised by you. I wore a dress I'd bought in September, deep navy, structured at the shoulders, simple enough to be appropriate and specific enough to be intentional. I arrived at 6:28, checked my coat, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and spent 12 minutes walking the perimeter of the room before the other guests began arriving in earnest. This was a habit of mine at events. The early walk, the quiet read of a space before it acquired its social topography, the tables filling and the clusters forming and the invisible architecture of a room organizing itself. I had done it at every significant professional event since my first industry conference in 2012, when I was 25 and had no idea how these rooms worked and figured the best way to learn was to be in them before everyone else was. I still did it now for different reasons, partly because I genuinely liked rooms before people arrived in them, partly because it grounded me in the physical space so that when the room filled, I was already oriented rather than finding my footing. I was standing near the east wall, looking at the table arrangement, when I heard my name. Rebecca. Harold Whitfield was approaching from the direction of the bar, carrying a glass of whiskey and wearing the slightly softened expression of a man who had been composing something for a while and had decided this was the moment to deliver it. He was 69 now. His hair had gone fully white since last year. He looked, in the way of certain people who age into their authority rather than away from it, more himself than he had at 40. "Harold," I said, "I didn't know you'd be here." "I come every year," he said, Force of habit from the old days. He stopped beside me and looked at the room filling gradually around us. I wanted to catch you before the evening got loud. Do you have a minute? Of course. He looked at his drink for a moment. I owe you an apology. Harold, let me say it. His voice was direct and unornamented, the voice of a man who had made a decision. When Daniel called me at 6:30 that morning, November 15th, I listened to him for 20 minutes. He told me you'd had a breakdown. He told me you were dangerous. He told me the company needed stable leadership and he was prepared to provide it. He paused. And I believed him. Not entirely, but enough to take the meeting. Enough to sit in that room and let him run his presentation before I heard from you. I had 30 years of experience reading people, and I still defaulted to the version of the story told by the man in the expensive suit, rather than waiting to hear from the woman who built the company. He looked at me directly. I know the vote went the right way. I know it doesn't matter operationally, but it mattered, and I was wrong, and I wanted to say that to you directly. I looked at him for a moment. Harold Whitfield was not a man given to self-examination. He was precise and practical and had the particular confidence of someone whose instincts had been proven right often enough that he'd stopped questioning them as a general practice. This was clearly not easy for him. That made it mean more, not less. I appreciate that, Harold, I said, genuinely. The Meridian work, he said, shifting to more comfortable ground. I've been following it, the East Portland project, the lens development. That's important work, Rebecca. That's the kind of thing that outlasts the business cycle. That's the idea, I said. Nathan Cole is extraordinary, he said. You two make a good team. We do, I said. Different reasons than I thought I was looking for, but the right reasons. He nodded. Something settled in his expression. The specific quality of a man who has said what he came to say and feels the better for having said it. Congratulations on the nominations, he said. Both of them. Thank you, Harold. He raised his glass slightly, a small private acknowledgement, and moved off into the filling room. I watched him go and felt something that I'd been carrying since November 2023 become slightly lighter. Not because his apology erased the moment, because it was honest, because it was offered without expectation of anything in return. Because it was a person choosing the harder, truer version of themselves when the easier one was still available. I had been learning in the past 2 years to recognize and value that choice, to make it myself, to understand that it was available always to everyone, the harder, truer version, and that the only thing standing between any person and that choice was the willingness to pay its cost. Nathan and Lisa arrived at 6:47. Tyler came with his girlfriend, a civil engineer named Priya who worked on municipal infrastructure and who I had met once before and found immediately likable. Several members of the Meridian and Thornton Green design teams arrived in a loose cluster between 7 and 7:15, dressed well and moving with the particular energy of people who work hard and are genuinely glad to be in a room celebrating that work. I found my table, sat down, accepted a second sparkling water. Talked to the landscape architect on my left about a watershed restoration project he was developing in the Willamette Valley. Talked to the city planner on my right about the zoning reform that was moving through the Portland City Council and what it might mean for affordable housing development in the inner east side. Normal, present, mine. The awards program began at 8 o'clock. I was not watching the door. That's important to say because it's true. I was not, by that point in the evening, in a state of heightened alertness about who might or might not be in the room. I had stopped moving through the world in that particular mode sometime in the spring of 2024. The gradual, almost imperceptible process of lowering a guard that had been in place for so long, it had stopped feeling like a guard and had started feeling like a personality trait. So I didn't see her come in. I saw her when I stood up to get a glass of water during the break between the first and second award categories, and I turned from the water station and she was there, 15 feet away, near the edge of the room, talking to a young woman I didn't recognize. Savannah. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse. Simple. Her hair was shorter than it had been, just past the shoulder, less styled than she used to wear it. She looked like a person who had stopped performing her appearance for an audience and had settled into something that suited her more quietly. She was laughing at something the young woman had said, a genuine laugh, the unstudied kind, the kind I had heard 1,000 times growing up, and that sounded now the way a familiar song sounds when you haven't heard it for a long time, known and strange in equal measure. She looked up. Our eyes met. Neither of us moved for a moment. I had known Savannah was working in the design industry. She had mentioned it in one of our occasional calls, the marketing coordinator position that had grown over the last year into a more substantial role at the small consulting firm downtown. What I had not known, had not thought to ask in the way you sometimes don't ask questions about the details of something you're still approaching carefully, was that the firm had been nominated tonight. Outstanding brand identity for a small practice. She was here not because of me, not as my sister, just as someone who worked in the industry and whose firm had been recognized by it. The coincidence of it, the sheer, unremarkable coincidence, was somehow more disarming than any planned encounter could have been. There was nothing to navigate, no prepared remarks, no decision to be made in advance. Just two people in the same room at the same time, each there on their own terms. I walked toward her. She watched me come. The young woman beside her noticed the quality of attention and said something quiet and moved away with the social grace of someone reading a room correctly. We stood 2 feet apart. "Hey," I said. "Hey." Her voice was careful, the same careful quality it had had on the phone in May, the voice of someone who has stopped assuming and started asking. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Meridian's nominated," I said. Something moved across her face. "I know, I saw it in the program." A pause. "Congratulations." "Your firm is nominated too," I said. "Brand identity." "Yeah." She looked at her glass. "We've been working on it for 2 years, small projects mostly, but it's real work. We actually do it." "I heard," I said, "from someone at PDX Design Week who mentioned your firm's rebrand. They said it was excellent." She looked at me. "You didn't tell them we were related." "No," I said, "because it didn't come up and because it wasn't relevant." In a silence that was not comfortable exactly, but not hostile either. More like the silence of two people who have both been changed by the same event in ways they are still measuring and are honest enough not to pretend otherwise. "I'm not going to make this into a thing," Savannah said quietly. "I'm not going to cry or give a speech or ask you anything. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that—" She paused, finding the phrasing. "I'm glad you're okay, that you're actually genuinely okay, not just saying it." "I am," I said, "actually genuinely." "I can tell." She said it with the certainty of someone who has known a person for long enough to read the difference. "You look like yourself." Something about that landed in a way I hadn't expected. Not because it was profound, but because it was true. And she was the person who had known me when I was 7 and when I was 16 and when I was 22, who had seen every version of me before this one and could therefore perceive the ways this version was different. "So do you," I said, and I meant it. The awards presentation resumed at 8:30. Outstanding Community Impact Design was announced third. The presenter, a Portland City Commissioner who had worked with Meridian on the Lens Project permitting process, read the citation with the slightly formal energy of someone reading something they genuinely mean rather than performing it. The East Portland Project, 42 units of mixed income housing, community designed, ahead of schedule, under budget, currently housing 116 people. 116 people. I had not thought about it in those terms until the commissioner said it. I had thought in units and square footage and structural calculations and funding rounds and timeline milestones. 116 people. Nathan walked to the stage. He accepted the award with the economy of a person who is more comfortable with buildings than with podiums. A brief acknowledgement, 3 sentences, a thank you to the community members who had participated in the design process, a mention of the Meridian team by collective name rather than individually, and then he stepped back and let the applause happen around him without particularly inhabiting it. He came back to the table and set the award down and looked at it for a moment. 116 people, I said quietly. He looked at me. Yeah, we didn't say anything else for a while. We didn't need to. Emerging Practice of the Year came at the end of the program. By the time the presenter reached the podium for the final award, the room had the slightly warm, loosened quality of 300 people who have been in a room together for 2 hours and have arrived at collective ease. The presenter read the citation. She talked about Meridian Build Studios' founding in December 2023. I noticed the date, the proximity of it to everything else that had happened in that month, the way something good had begun in the wreckage of something bad and quietly grown into this. about the East Portland project, about the Lentz development, about the Rural Elderly Housing Initiative in development. She said, Meridian Build Studio is what happens when an architect and a strategist decide that the most important thing a building can do is serve the people who need it most. Nathan looked at me across the table. I looked back. You should go up, he said, both of us. We walked to the stage together. I stood at the lectern and looked at the room. 300 people who had spent their careers thinking about the built environment, thinking about what spaces do to people and for people and the difference between those two things. And I felt, standing there, the specific alignment of a life that has found its direction not through a single dramatic choice, but through the slow accumulation of honest ones. Thank you, I said. Meridian Build Studio exists because two people had a conversation in a coffee shop in December 2023 and decided that the most useful thing they could do with what they knew was build housing for people who needed it. That's it. That's the whole origin story. I paused. I've learned in the last 2 years that the most important structures are the ones you can't photograph for a magazine, the ones that work so well they disappear into the lives of the people using them. That's what we're trying to build. I looked at Nathan, who was standing 2 feet to my right, holding the award, looking at me with the expression of someone who recognizes a truth being spoken. We're not done. We're just getting started. We stepped back from the podium together. The applause filled the room. At the end of the evening, after the program, after the small clusters of conversation that form when a formal event releases into its informal second half, I found myself standing near the coat check with the award in my hand, waiting for the line to clear. Savannah appeared beside me, not seeking me out, just arriving at the same location from a different direction, the two of us converging naturally in the ordinary way of people who have spent enough time apart to stop bracing for the convergence. She was putting on her coat. I was waiting for mine. Your speech was good, she said. Thank you. The part about structures you can't photograph, that was good. Nathan told me once that the best buildings are the ones that stop being visible, I said, that you stop seeing them and start seeing the life happening inside them. I've been thinking about that ever since. She finished buttoning her coat. She looked at the award in my hands for a moment. I'm proud of you, she said. The words came out simply, without architecture around them. No preamble, no qualification, no performance. Just the plain thing. I looked at her. There were 100 ways to respond to that. Complicated ways, honest ways, ways that acknowledged the distance between what we'd been and what we were now and the unresolved territory that lay between. Ways that were true but incomplete. Ways that were kind but imprecise. I chose the simplest true thing. Thank you, Savannah. She nodded. Her coat check number came up. She retrieved her coat, said goodbye with the ease of someone who is leaving without needing to make the leaving significant, and walked toward the door. I watched her go. Then I got my coat, put it on, and walked out into the October night. The air was cold and clear, the specific clarity that Portland occasionally produces in October when the summer has fully gone and the winter hasn't fully arrived, a brief window of clean cold that feels like the year taking a breath. The city was lit up around me, familiar and ongoing and indifferent to my particular story the way cities are, the way I had always loved cities for being. Nathan and Lisa were on the sidewalk 20 feet away. He was hailing a rideshare. She was saying something that made him laugh, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that changes a face. Tyler and Priya were across the street, already walking. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with the award in my hands and the October air on my face and the city around me and the sense, not dramatic, not triumphant, just steady and real and mine, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. You good? Nathan called over. Yeah, I said. Go ahead. I'll get my own car. He gave me the look, the one that meant, are you sure without asking it? And I gave him the look that meant, yes, go. And he went, Lisa tucking her hand into his arm as they walked, and I watched them for a moment and felt something warm and uncomplicated about the fact of two people being happy. Then I opened my phone, requested a rideshare, and stood on the sidewalk in the October night, waiting. Monday, February 9th, 2026, 7:30 a.m. Portland in February has a specific light, low and silver, coming in sideways when it comes at all, more honest than flattering, but not without its own kind of beauty. The kind of light that doesn't make things look better than they are, but shows them clearly. I was at my desk in the Meridian Build studio offices by 7:30. The office occupied the top 2 floors of a converted 1940s brick warehouse in the Pearl District, a building Nathan had found in August 2024 and that we had spent 3 months renovating with the same philosophy we brought to the projects we designed for others. Thoughtful use of existing materials, passive lighting systems, spaces that supported the way people actually worked rather than the way someone had decided they should work. My office had a north-facing window that looked out over the rooftops to the West Hills, where the trees were bare in February and the sky above them was the color of pewter. I had learned, over the past 2 years, to find that view beautiful rather than merely tolerable. The gray had things the blue didn't: depth, texture, the sense of weather as a living condition rather than an aesthetic one. I poured coffee. I opened my laptop. I had a site call with the rural housing team at 8, a design review with Nathan at 10, and a lunch with an investor who was interested in our 4th project, a community land trust development in Southeast Portland that was, if we could get the financing right, the most ambitious thing we had attempted yet. Normal, purposeful, mine. I want to tell you where everyone is because I think it matters how stories end. Not the dramatic endings, the climaxes, and confrontations and reversals that move the plot, but the ordinary endings, the places where people land when the significant events have passed and real life resumes its particular, unglamorous continuance. Daniel is in Bellevue. He manages the floor at the furniture showroom. The Apex Capital loan is being repaid at a rate that will take 8 years to clear. He has, according to a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it without being asked, a girlfriend. Someone he met at a cycling class, someone who knows nothing about Portland or architecture or any of it, who knows only the version of him that exists now. I hope, with genuine and uncomplicated sincerity, that he is honest with her. I hope she is good for him. I do not think about him often, and when I do, it is without heat, just the neutral acknowledgement of a person who was part of my life and is no longer. Savannah works at the design consulting firm downtown, where she has been promoted twice in 18 months and where, by all accounts she has given me directly and a few I've received secondhand, she is actually good at the job because she is actually doing the job rather than performing it. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in the Division Street corridor that she pays for herself. We text occasionally, a link to something interesting, a check-in, the kind of low-pressure contact that feels neither forced nor freighted. We had dinner together in January 2026, just the 2 of us, at a Thai place on Clinton Street. We talked for 2 hours about work and the city and a documentary we had both apparently watched in the same week without knowing it. When we said goodnight on the sidewalk, she hugged me and I let her, and it was not the hug of 2 people performing reconciliation. It was just a hug. We are not what we were. I don't think we will be again, and I have made my peace with that. What we are is something more careful and more honest and, in a way I couldn't have predicted, more real. The affection is earned rather than assumed. The trust is rebuilt in small increments rather than inherited. It is slower and less comfortable and I think, ultimately, more solid. Nathan and Lisa are still together, which I know because I see them regularly and because the way Nathan talks about her has the quality of someone who has found a person who matches them at the frequencies that matter. He is designing a house for them. A small, precise, extraordinary house on a lot in Northeast Portland that he showed me the drawings for in December, and which is the kind of thing that makes you understand why some people spend their lives thinking about how space shapes experience. It is the most personal work I have ever seen from him. He and I have lunch on Tuesdays. We talk about projects, about the industry, about ideas we're developing for future work. Sometimes we talk about other things. The partnership is what I said it would be. 50-50, no ambiguity, everything in writing, built on a foundation of mutual respect that has been tested by disagreement and proven sound. It is the best professional relationship of my life. I expect it to remain so. My father and I speak on the phone once a week on Sunday evenings. He came to Portland in October and attended the awards dinner, sat in the back, didn't tell me he was coming until he was already in the city, appeared at the pre-event drinks with the slightly sheepish expression of a man making amends in the only language available to him, which is presence. We went to breakfast the following morning and talked for 3 hours. About my grandmother, about things I hadn't known about his own choices and the costs of them. About the difference between a father who provides and a father who shows up, and the years he spent confusing one for the other. We are building something. Slowly, honestly, without pretending the preceding years were different than they were. It is real. My mother is the one I hold the most carefully. She is not a different person. Margaret Thornton is not built for transformation, and I have stopped needing her to be. What she has done is adjusted. She calls once a week. She asks about the work rather than explaining it to me. She attended the groundbreaking for the Lens project in May 2025 and stood in the rain for 40 minutes without complaining, and afterward she said, "I always knew you could build things." It was not an apology. It was not a reckoning. It was my mother, in the most honest version of herself that she has access to, saying something true about her daughter. I accepted it for what it was. The Thornton Education Trust funded its 12th school in January 2026, a small elementary school in a rural Douglas County community that had been operating out of a portable classroom since 2019. The opening ceremony was on a Friday. I drove down the night before and stayed in a motel in Roseburg. The ceremony was in the morning, attended by the school board, 3 county commissioners, and approximately 40 children who had been told there would be a ribbon cutting and had arrived with the specific, excited energy of small people who understand something significant is happening without yet having the words for why. One of them, a girl of about 7 with braids and a very serious expression, stood beside me during the ribbon cutting and looked at the building with an evaluative intensity that I recognized. "Is this a good building?" she asked me. "I think so," I said. "What do you think?" She considered it seriously. "The windows are big," she said. "I like that. You can see outside." "That's exactly why we made them big," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went inside. Monday, February 9th, 2026, 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes before my first call, I stood at the north window of my office and looked out at the February morning. The silver light, the bare hilltop trees, the city going about the ordinary business of a Monday. I thought about the morning of November 14th, 2023, the espresso and the financial news, and the ordinary Tuesday that became the Tuesday everything changed, the specific quality of that morning's light, the weight of what I hadn't yet allowed myself to know, and the weight of what I already knew, and the strange suspended moment between those two things. I thought about all the mornings since, the ones that were hard, and the ones that were good, and the ones that were simply what mornings are, neutral and ongoing, and asking nothing of you except that you be present in them. I turned from the window, sat down, opened the site call on my laptop. Nathan's face appeared on the screen, coffee in hand, in his own office 2 floors below. "Morning?" he said. "Morning," I said, and we went to work. I want to end by saying something that I've been thinking about since long before I knew I would tell this story to anyone. People talk about betrayal as if the injury is the ending, as if the moment of discovery is where the story stops, with you on one side of a locked bathroom door and your whole life on the other side of it. But that's not where the story stops. The story stops here. At a desk in a building I helped design, on a February morning, 2 minutes before a call I'm looking forward to, in a life that is genuinely, uncomplicatedly mine. I did not get here by being harder than I needed to be. I did not get here by deciding to feel nothing. I got here by deciding, slowly, imperfectly, with significant backtracking along the way, that the truth was worth more than the comfort of a familiar lie. That the people in your life should be there because they choose to be and because you choose them, not because leaving would be inconvenient or complicated or sad. That the most important structure you will ever build is not a building. It's the life you construct deliberately from what remains after you've been honest about what doesn't belong there. My grandmother knew that. She left me a piece of land and a piece of paper and the knowledge that I was the one who was going to build something. She was right. I am.